To our panel, thanks to all of you who came here to Leeds to take part. Until next Thursday, good night.
Hello and welcome to BBC Parliament's recorded coverage from the select committee rooms. The Home Affairs Committee held a session on counter-terrorism. The committee heard from relatives of the 3 teenage girls who fled Britain to Syria, the Metropolitan Police and the Turkish Ambassador to the UK.
Could I call the committee to order? This is a session dealing with the committee's ongoing inquiries into counter-terrorism and our revisiting of our report that we published last year into counter-terrorism. Could I welcome to the dais Mr. Hussain, Ms. Begum and Ms. Aziz and Mr. Akunjee. Thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the committee today. Could I ask that the doors be now shut? Thank you very much. The committee and the public are well aware of the surrounding the fact that your daughter, Mr. Hussain, and your sister and your cousin have left the country. And on behalf of the committee, we cannot imagine the anguish and the distress that you must feel, not just on the day that you knew that they had gone, but also today, because they are still missing. So please would you accept from us our best wishes at this time and our support to you personally on what you have gone through. It is every parent's nightmare that this should happen. Thank you for coming to give evidence to us today. After we hear from you, we will also be hearing from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner about this and other matters, and you're welcome to stay for that. And we'll also be hearing from the Turkish Ambassador. Can I start with a general question to all three of you? And Mr. Akunjee, please feel free to come in whenever you want to answer any of the questions. Starting with you, Mr. Abbasi. When did you first realise that your daughter had left the country and left to go to Syria?
At 17th of February, and I reported the same day.
And did you report that to the police?
Yes.
Did you, at that stage, on the 17th of February, did you think that your daughter, Amira, had left the country, or was she just missing from your home?
Yeah, missing.
Missing from your home?
Yeah.
Which police officer did you ring? Which police station did you ring?
I just called the police 99 or 101.
The general
yeah,
999?
Me and my wife, actually.
Yes. Ms. Begum, you are the older sister of Shamima. Shamima. Again, when did you first realise that Shamima was missing, and who did you notify?
We found out, well, she went missing on the 17th, she didn't come home, so went through her stuff, generally looking for some phone numbers for friends, and then I came across the letter that the police had given to her hands. So when we found the letter, that kind of immediately raised alarm, and we called the police straight away. I called the police, reported her missing. I also called the phone number that was on the bottom of that letter, just to say, I've just found this letter amongst all the stuff of my sister. It hadn't been handed to the family, and now my sister's disappeared as well. I think I was quite angry at the time when I made that call.
So did you do a 999 call as well?
I did a 999 call, yes.
Yes. And Ms. Aziz, you are the first cousin of Khadija Sultana.
Khadija Sultana.
Khadija Sultana. When did you find out and what did you do?
If I may say, I'm speaking on behalf of the family.
Of course. And can I just say, the acoustics in this room are very, very bad. You will need to speak up, I'm afraid, to enable all the members of the committee to hear you.
Okay, Khadija, on the 17th of February, Khadija left for school. She told her mother that she's going to a school club, some extended school club, which was taking place. And then she didn't return home at the end of the day, so that kind of raised alarm bells for the family. They were querying amongst each other.
Again, you'll need to speak up, I'm afraid we can't hear you at all.
Sorry, they were querying amongst each other, amongst the siblings, as to where she was. That night, they were extremely worried because she didn't turn up, and the family reported her missing the following morning.
When did you all first discover that they might be en route to Syria? Because this, at the moment, sounds as if they were just missing. You call the police, you did what any person would do, dial 999. When did you first discover that she had gone to Syria or was on her way there, Mr. Hussein?
The next day, we have been told that she is in Turkey, Istanbul.
On the 18th?
Yeah, the next day, yeah.
And is that by the local police or was that by the Metropolitan Police Counter-terrorism section?
What all I know is the police, Metropolitan Police. Where they are from, I have no clue.
They told you she was in Turkey?
Yeah.
And is that the same for you, Ms. Begum and Ms. Aziz? You were all told on the 18th?
We were told on the 18th. We had 3 officers come into the house, and we thought it was part of just a routine. So we were asked questions: where did she go? How did she dress? So about half an hour conversation, and then the officer, James Leake, turned around and said, "But we all know where she is." Sorry, what do you mean we all know where she is? And they turned around and said, yeah, she's gone to Turkey. So that's how we found out she was in Turkey.
Mrs. Aziz?
The family found the letter on the 18th of February. I think it was sometime in the afternoon or evening. I can't confirm that. And then they were also advised by the police that they may be heading towards Syria, and also we kind of raised questions with the police in respect of the letter where it stated that the previous girl in December was heading towards Syria.
Until that time, when you were told that they were going to Turkey, did you have any idea or any inkling whatsoever that your family members were involved in, these 3 girls were involved in radicalisation or had been radicalised? Had you any idea, did it come to your attention in any way that they were involved in the kinds of things that it is alleged that they were involved in following this becoming public?
Not at all.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Not at all. My sister was into any normal teenage things. She used to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians and stuff like that. So there was nothing that indicated that she was radicalised in any way, not at home.
Yeah, Khadija's family were not concerned about her at all. She was just, going to school quite happily, coming home, spending time with the family, just the ordinary things. There wasn't anything unusual there for the family to...
You need to speak up, Ms. Aziz. I'm sorry, otherwise we can't hear you.
Yes.
You do need to speak up.
They weren't concerned at all. There weren't any signs for them to recognise any changes.
I think to add to that as well,
Yes, Mr. Akunjee.
that is the same experience that the school had as well. They had recognised no indicators at all that the girls had been in any way involved in radicalisation, and indeed those girls had had some contact with the police between December and February, and they themselves confirmed that there was no indicators on their markers for those girls to be having been of any sort of concern either.
Now, you mentioned the letter that you received, or that you found. This was a letter that was supposed to be given to you. It was not given to you, it was given to the girls. Why do you think it was not given to you? And would it have been better if the police had handed the letter directly to yourselves?
That's a puzzle we are in. Why?
But do you think that letter should have been given to you directly by the police?
Yeah, as we are responsible for our children.
And secondly, in respect of the way in which the police have handled matters subsequently, you, Mr. Akunjee, presumably speaking on behalf of the families, have been quite critical of the Metropolitan Police.
Well,
what in particular are the families concerned about?
Well, partly a degree of misinformation or information that's way behind the media itself. So they were assigned with liaison officers, who are police liaison officers, who they were hoping to get information from about their children. But it turned out that they were feeding them information which they were getting from the media, which was rather an unpleasant experience. On top of that, we had a particular officer who...
Sorry, could I just ask the gentleman who is coughing, he might want to just step outside and have some water, because it's very difficult to hear what's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Akunjee.
There was a particular officer who was involved in the reading of this letter at the school to the children, and also handing those letters to the kids. That same officer also happens to now be a liaison officer for one of the families. Now, the families were obviously very concerned about the fact that the letter never made it through to them through independent channels, avoiding the children themselves. But the officer gave the indication it was the school who should have done so, not himself, even though it's a police letter. He never informed the family from the outset, even though he must have known, because he read the letter, that the girls on their disappearance were in Syria. And rather troublingly, actually, my particular direct involvement with him was that he had called the families and asked them to come in for a meeting at Scotland Yard. And this is after the relationship is somewhat frayed between police and the families. I had advised the families to ask the officer to contact me, and I'd said that directly. The families informed the officer, and the officer did contact me, and I told him that this was what I'd advised my clients. He then immediately phoned my client, not realizing I was sitting with them, behind my back, and had effectively advised them not to listen to my advice. At which point I took the phone off him and asked him, are you advising my clients not to listen to their solicitor's advice? I want to speak to your line manager, which I eventually did.
Yes, we'll come on to the other aspects, but just in respect to the letter, Miss Begum, if you and the other families had received that letter, rather than it going to the girls, what would have been that effect on yourself and the others if you'd received that letter directly?
If we'd received the letter directly, we would have contacted the police. We would have contacted the police, found out, okay, why, where has this first girl gone, if they gave us that information. And I would have spoken to my sister, and I would have said, hold on, okay, if she was a close friend of yours, what do you know, and how much information can you give?
And did any of you know any circumstances concerning the young girl who had gone to Syria from this school in December? Is it right that none of you knew that she had gone to Syria? Mr. Abbasi?
Yes.
You didn't know that this other girl had gone there? Miss Begum?
I didn't know she had gone to Syria, but in December, 7 girls had been questioned in regards to that. One of the other 7 girls lives very close to us, so her mother was this, I would call the 4th girl. This 4th girl, she was being contacted by the police. She'd been asked to go into the station and so forth. So she was technically, she felt like, in her own words and in her own family's words, they felt like they were being harassed by the police. Now, from my mum and the 4th girl's mum, they're quite close. So she kept asking my mum, hold on, my child's being questioned and this, that and the other. How comes nothing is being said to my sister Shamima? So my mum asked me to have a quick word with her, find out if she knows anything. And my sister said that on that December interview, they'd been shown some pictures of this first girl that had gone, and they'd just been asked general questions about that. That's the information I got from her. She also told me that she had gone abroad, but she didn't tell me it was Syria or Turkey. She had told me it was Italy.
So what you're telling us, committee, is that the lack of that information did not prepare you for what might have happened, and indeed not getting the letter directly would have also prepared you.
Absolutely.
One of the issues is the passport of the three girls. Some people have expressed surprise that they would have access to this. Had you had this information, would you have been able to hang on to the passports? Mr. Abbasi, who normally keeps the passports in your family?
Me and my wife.
So how did your daughter get access to it then?
So I don't know. She knows where the passport has the document. She's trustworthy for family.
She just went and took it, basically, is your view. Mr. Akunjee, you have been very critical on behalf of the family. Nothing that you've said has not been on behalf of the family of the Metropolitan Police, in which you have said that you believe that they owe the family an apology. Is that
Indeed.
right?
Yes, I do.
Why should the police apologise to the family?
Well, in particular, the handling of the relationship has led to a fairly critical point where the family had come out into the press and to the media and explained and expressed their concern that had this letter not been given to them directly, as is what anyone would expect, then they would have been on notice that issues to do with foreign travel, Syria, or maybe radicalisation would be floating to the fore. It's not something that a parent who is, the common experience with parents and 15-year-olds is they don't know very much about what's going on in their 15-year-olds' lives, I would imagine. But that would have floated to the fore and they could maybe address it. That was a critical factor. At the height of that tension, the police then released a Met press release, which basically effectively called the family out to be liars, suggested that that information specifically was communicated to the family on December the 9th.
About the missing girl?
Indeed, yes. And that became rather a sensitive topic. One would have thought that the police, who we pay and train to gather information accurately, we rely on what they say in courts, would at least be able to find the information about what they themselves had given to the family accurately in sensitive circumstances, particularly in the context of children and counter-terrorism.
Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Hubbard.
Thank you. Just going back to the letters, just a brief question on this. Do you think there's any possibility that the letters being given to the girls triggered the departure? Do you think that's possible, or is that unlikely?
It could be possible. We don't know what went through their minds.
I mean, it is speculative. It's something that we have looked at. And it certainly is a possibility that when schoolgirls are effectively asked to, and I quote, a colloquial rat on their friends, and they're being spoken to by an officer, we don't know if they're aware if the officer was counter-terrorism or not, and the letter is headed with Metropolitan Police, if that didn't at least raise some panic in them, either expedite some plans they may have been formulating, or even led them to formulate the plan to leave thereafter. All of those possibilities are certainly possibilities, but within the minds of a 15-year-old, we don't know which one they actually picked.
And sorry.
So can I just ask, Adam, the police officer who actually spoke to the girls, he spoke to the girls on two separate occasions, once which was in December, and then another time which was in, when was it, 5th of February. However, we've heard from the community people. There had been several more conversations between the police and the girls on the school premises.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. I strongly disagree that the letter is given to 15 years old young girls, because as a letter, the word police by itself and terrorism, counter-terrorism as global issue is for 15 years old. To deal with that is heavy burden, and technically also we feel that we are, as a parent, neglected. We're supposed to know these all things.
Yeah, no, I can understand. the concern and how you feel the police let you down. Were there other letters given to other pupils at all, do you know, and were those passed on to the parents?
As we understand it, similar letters were given to only 7 pupils in total, so it was a very small selection of students who had this.
And the others were passed on to the parents or not?
We have no idea.
The 7 were all associated with the missing girl,
Indeed.
I understand. Is that right?
That's correct.
David Winnick.
The police commissioner, as has already been indicated, will be asked about what has happened and why the letters were not sent to the parents. Obviously, this will be one of the first questions we will be putting to the police commissioner. And I wonder if I could just ask, what reason do you believe led the 3 females, young, I think they were born in this country and educated here, why should they be attracted to what virtually everybody in Britain believes is a murderous outfit, like ISIS, the beheadings which we know about, the sex slavery, everything which is so disgusting and evil? Why should they be attracted? Could there be any explanation that you could give why that should be the position?
Yes.
I mean, you know, reflecting on it now, I think, you know, given that the first girl in December went to Syria, it was a close friend of theirs, of the 3 girls. And, you know, in my view, it could be, you know, because they just wanted to see their friend or, you know, just have some form of contact. We don't know. You know, the fact of the matter is we really don't know. But, you know, given, you know, the media, the press, everything that's coming to light, that's what I would think.
Is it possible that there was indoctrination out of school, unknown clearly to the family? Because as you indicated, if you knew, you would have done your best to dissuade your daughter, your cousin, your sister.
Yeah, I have something to say. As I know my daughter, it's very difficult to predicate why they leave this country. That's why we are left on middle of nowhere. We really in trouble. Why? That's the big question. Why the letter has given to them? Why they left? So we are in this kind of situation, circle.
Do you feel that other young females could be subject to what has happened, that they could be encouraged? Do you think there's a possibility that others may take the same route?
If I could offer something up
Mr.
on that. It is a very difficult thing to understand, and I would hasten to suggest that understanding a 15-year-old girl's mindset generally in this time for people of our age is a difficult thing to understand.
Of course.
Justin Bieber is a difficult thing to understand. But in terms of the where the argument goes, there are people who have joined the YPJ from this country. They've gone over and they want to fight with you know, other organizations out there against ISIS. That is also similarly difficult to understand. To put ourselves into the mindsets of 15-year-old girls who we don't know what contact they've had, with whom, and how they've been led along this path, it's specific to these parents that they don't know the answer to that question. In the same way that a parent whose child has been taken away, let's say, falls in love with a teacher and runs off to France, does not know how that happened, but it is shocking to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
all right.
please.
Okay. So this conversation created a question that I never comes through. So the letter distracts our daughter, and I mean what I'm trying to say. Distract our family and terrorize our children. And what we want to know is, apart from this letter, what was verbal conversation with this child? As I know my daughter, she's a kind of girl, if it is sunset, she will call me to pick her. So how on earth she traveled to abroad and to join ISIS, for us is a very difficult question to answer, even to predicate.
We
It's
understand.
terrified. The letter terrified my daughter.
we understand what
Yeah.
you're going through.
Yeah.
As the Chair said, every one of us understands very well what you must be feeling and suffering at this moment. My last question is there anything a parent in the locality could do, in your view, to try and find out if their children are being indoctrinated, bearing in mind what has happened in this case? Would you suggest that the parents should be very much on their guard and try and...
But as our situation is, we are mentally disabled. We focus on our children to come back home, not in prison, because they are victims, they're children.
Yes, Ms. Begum.
In terms of what you just said, I believe as a family we monitored what she did when she was on her phone, made sure she was reading books. My sister enjoyed reading books, so she was reading books on there. When she was playing games, we'd join in and have competitions. So in that sense, we feel like we had monitored as much as we could. Obviously, we'd miss something out because obviously such a big incident has happened. But as far as we know, we did what we could to keep an eye on our child. And so, but in retrospect, I think if we had been given information about this first girl, then we would have thought, okay, a friend of hers has gone missing. Now, this is a friend of hers. Friends have similar mindsets. Is her mindset similar to that? We would question that. We were never given the opportunity to question it because in December, when this girl had gone missing, my family only received a call from the school saying that our sister had been spoken to by the police because a friend had gone missing. The word missing could just mean, in my mind, the word missing means she's not at home. It doesn't mean I don't think she's gone abroad. I think
Indeed.
she's hopefully still in the country.
Yes. In defence of the school, can I just say I've spoken to the head teacher and the school has told me that they were instructed by the police not to tell anybody that the young girl in December had gone to Syria. That was kept in the highest confidence. You were only allowed to know that she was missing. Nobody was allowed to know that she'd gone to Syria. That is what the school said. Yes, Ms. Myers.
But the school failed to actually inform us that there was a police investigation in school. There were several visits by the police officers in school, so the school failed us in that respect. The school also acted as an appropriate adult on behalf of, the parents at home. Surely they should have had that discussion with the parent at home.
Well, that is a very useful point we will put to them.
Yeah.
Finally, I want to bring Mr. Ellison.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Abbas.
Logically also, in my view, it doesn't make sense. If we say, for example, I give James missing, it's not a complete sentence, as I understand. Where? That, as a family, we have to know that we can prevent this to happen.
Yes, we are very clear as a committee. What you're saying to us is if you'd known about this letter, if you'd known about the contents,
Absolutely,
you might have been able to...
Yeah.
You can't be 100% sure, but you might have been able to prevent them going. And that
Absolutely.
missing letter was critical to you not taking action.
Absolutely.
Ms.
It's not
Begum.
just a missing letter, though. You're saying the school was told that they had to keep it under wraps. My sister was told that what she was spoken to about the interview she shouldn't discuss outside. Now, you can't tell a 15-year-old to hold that kind of information away from her family. And it's not just my little sister that has said this to me. The fourth girl, I've also asked her, did the police turn around and say to you, don't talk to anybody about this case? And she confirmed that that's what she was told by the police. Police cannot tell a 15-year-old to keep things away. If you're going to tell a 15-year-old, keep that information away from your parents, away from anybody, they need to inform the family as well.
Of course. We understand
Imagine
that.
what kind of picture it draws to tell a 15-year-old between me and you, that's
Yes.
burden.
We understand that.
Yeah.
Can I bring in now Michael Ellis?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And can I express my condolences for what's happened as far as your family members are concerned? And can I just ask you, first of all, Ms. Begum, did I hear you say in an answer to an earlier question that earlier in the process you felt that your sister felt that she was being harassed by the police?
No, not my sister. So there were 7 girls that were interviewed. There was a 4th girl who my family have contact with, this first girl felt like she was, the fourth girl, sorry, felt like she was being harassed by the police because she actually wasn't friends with the first girl who left.
But this is somebody in the orbit of your sister, was it? This is a friend or an acquaintance of your sister?
Acquaintance of my sister, but one of the 7 girls that was interviewed
Yes.
in December.
Do you yourself think that the relationship prior to your sister going missing and the other family members going missing, do you think that there was an unhappy relationship as far as the police are concerned? There was an untrusting relationship or an unsatisfactory relationship as far as the police are concerned?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, how do you feel, Mr. Akunjee, you've been quite critical of the police as far as their conduct is concerned. What I'm just trying to establish is there are those that might say that the police can't really win. They are sometimes criticised by some people, I'm not saying everyone, that their presence is intrusive in some communities. But then you have, as solicitor, have been critical of the police in that they haven't done enough or that they've misconducted themselves in this case. No. So what would you say to those that might argue that really, as far as the police are concerned, they can't win?
No, I've been critical where I believe criticism is appropriate. All the police had to do was use an envelope, and we might have avoided all of this, really. So that's my criticism there. On top of that, my criticism is also that where the families have come out and set out their stall, effectively given their evidence as they are doing today in front of the media, the police made a mistake. We'll call it a mistake, but it's a mistake in that they alleged that between them and the schools, the family had been informed, effectively calling the family liars in the media.
But you've also said that it's unrealistic to expect family members to necessarily understand, and I'm sure many people would sympathise with this, would understand what's going through the mind of a 15-year-old. I think that's what you said.
Indeed.
But isn't it also, in that case, even more unrealistic to expect the police to understand what's going through the minds of 15-year-olds?
Well, given that they're tasked with the resources and the powers to investigate crime, and particularly terrorism, they were on notice with the first girl in December having gone to the location. These families were further disadvantaged in terms of understanding their children because the police had put a cap on the information to be given to them, both through the school and through the children themselves, by effectively telling them to hush up. So how are the families supposed to work out what's going in their children's lives when they're not being involved in any process to do with the school or with the police, and they're also similarly being specifically excluded from the danger factors around their children? That is the criticism.
But there is also the realistic position that the police presumably, I mean, the Commissioner will speak for himself, we'll hear from him shortly, but is it not possible to argue that the police don't want to do all they can to disincentivise others from following those who have gone before, and therefore it's not in the public interest or in the interest of anyone else necessarily to give all the information that the police are aware of? It's quite routine in police practice to withhold some information.
Indeed, you've heard from the family though already that the first thing they did when they saw the letter was call the number on the letter. Had they seen the letter, they would have been on notice. The police themselves clearly were aware that that minimum information should have been delivered to the families because they attempted to do so, albeit in a somewhat, in a somewhat bizarre manner through the actual girls.
Well, so you're
Can I finish my point?
So be it. Yes, please.
So, given that the police knew that they had to communicate at least that minimum information, they failed to do so.
Well, Mr. Hussain, do you think...
If I may, I just want to put a question for you, if I may. So, if police are not expected to understand 15 years young girl's mind, so I'll say, okay, for the sake of argument, but what do you think? Is that appropriate to give the letter neglecting the family? Where are we? Where is our position as a parent?
Mr. Abbasi, I think we get that point. We understand.
Can I just... Mr. Hussain, yes. Can I just ask you about this? The passports were within your possession and control at home. Is that right? And your daughter knew where they were? Is that right? So you're assuming that your daughter took the passport without your knowledge?
Yeah, of course.
Is that right?
She's trustworthy, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know...
She's trustworthy, I mean,
Yes.
she's free.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you know how it is that do any of the family members know how it is that the flights were paid for? So I understand that these 3 flights would have cost in excess of £1,000, or certainly many hundreds of pounds. Do we know where the money was obtained by 3 15-year-old, or 2 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old? Miss Bigham, do you have any idea?
My sister, I know for a fact my sister didn't have access to that kind of money.
Really?
Yes.
And Mrs. Is, do you have any knowledge of...
We don't know how they...
No idea how that type of money... And were there any impressions from members of the families that any indicators that the girls were perhaps becoming more devout in their thinking, or they had changed their general conduct? Had you noticed any differences in their behaviour in the weeks and months prior to this happening?
No. It was
Nothing at all?
Nothing. I think if we had noticed anything, we would have been pretty much very effective in stepping in and kind of querying, but we haven't.
And I just have one other question, if I may. Do you, as far as the internet is concerned, and social media, do you think that that had a part to play in this? Were any of your family members heavy users of social media? Is it within your knowledge that or belief that may have had a part to play? Do you think there's room for more regulation in this area?
So I think it's the government that's encouraging, the uptake of hyperspeed broadband. I mean, what would you like?
Mr. Akunjee, if you just bear with me, I'm asking the family members, did you notice whether there'd been heavy use of social media by your family members beforehand? Do you think it's anything to do with that? Do you think that could have had a part to play?
Yeah, I have no clue. I'm not from that area. I don't use technology that much.
Thank you.
But in fact, it has come into the public domain that one of the girls was a heavy user of Twitter and was following 70 extremists on Twitter, which presumably came as a complete, total surprise and shock to all of you. I mean, I would not know who my 17-year-old daughter follows on Twitter. It's just not something parents would do, presumably. You wouldn't have known this. Can I just ask you about the future and your message to other parents before we come to the end of the session? Do you know about the government's prevent strategy? Do any of you have any idea what this strategy is? Have you ever heard of it, and do you know anything about it?
I personally hadn't heard about it until obviously the situation's now come up, and now we know about it. I understand that risk assessments by prevent ask for risk assessments or something need to be done on certain situations and stuff. So I assumed that when the first girl went off, the 7 that were being interviewed should have had risk assessments done on them. Now, that wasn't done then, but I do now have the school knocking on the door asking to have a risk assessment done on my other sister, who happens to be attending the same school as well. Now, I just feel that if those protocols were put in place at the right time, then we would have just known more information.
Mr. Razzie, your part... Yes, of course, Mrs. Ease.
There is, I mean, in respect of your younger sister and Abbas's youngest daughter, they're both in the same school and they're actually still waiting. Given all of this has happened, they're still waiting for this risk assessment to take place, which really should have been like instant.
It should have been instant. Yeah. But where do members of the community go? And we talk a lot about the community and what the community can do to help. Where would you go if you had concerns about your daughter or your son being radicalised? Who would you go to in those circumstances? You wouldn't go to the police necessarily, would you? Is there someone you could turn to talk about these issues?
The school.
The school?
We would like to, be in a position to approach the school for, circumstances like this.
And that would be the best for members of the community, because they wouldn't, I mean, there is a line called the anti-terrorism hotline, but very few parents would pick up the phone and ring up the anti-terrorism hotline if they had concerns about the radicalisation of their children, would they? There needs to be somewhere else for them to go to. And you're saying it should be the school, is that right?
As for me, I don't know the symptom even what radicalization is.
Sure, because it's never come before you. And in respect of the Turkish authorities and what happened in Turkey, once you knew that your daughters had gone to Turkey, once you had been told this, would your expectation have been that they would have been followed out there by the relevant authorities, be it the police or someone else? Because we've seen the CCTV footage. They were obviously in Turkey, in that bus station, for a considerable period of time before they crossed the border on Friday. I'm talking about the gap between Wednesday and Friday. What is your expectation? What would you have wanted to see happen in those 48 hours?
We were told.
Yes.
We were told that there were police on the ground in Turkey looking for them. This is the information that we've been given by the Met Police, because obviously we're concerned. We've been told our kids have gone off to Turkey, so we're concerned. We're constantly asking, do you have people there looking for them? We kept being told, yes, we do, yes, we do. When this footage came out of the bus station, we're thinking, hold on, we reported it straight away. We were told that all 3 girls, their pictures were being distributed in Turkey and everybody knows about it now. But if that was the case, then they were there for a considerable amount of time. They would have been seen by somebody. And obviously that message hasn't been passed on. Messages aren't, in this whole situation that we've come through, messages aren't getting passed on. Somewhere along the line, someone's missing something out.
Because the Turkish authorities are very clear, and we'll hear from the ambassador shortly, that they were not notified till Friday, and therefore they couldn't activate their various investigation systems.
Yeah, okay.
Is that what you've been told?
No, who fills that gap? Because as we, the same day report, and Turkey said Friday, we report the same day, that gap blank as for me.
Mr. Akunjee, an apology from the Metropolitan Police, that is what you seek?
Yes, I was hoping that relations could be built, and relations can only be built after they've broken down after an apology, I would have thought.
And secondly, in terms of the liaison officer, in view of what has been said about the PREVENT strategy, is that someone who can work with your clients and the community, or would you like to see someone new in there, more senior, who's able to deal with this issue that has obviously been all over the world? This is not something just in London. Everyone in the world knows about these 3 girls.
It's abhorrent behaviour in the extreme for a police officer to advise, who's not legally qualified, to advise an individual not to follow their lawyer's advice. I would say that that officer needs to revisit his training, I would say.
And Mrs. Ease, you obviously want your cousin back as quickly as possible. What would be your message, each of you, to other parents and other relatives in the same situation as yourselves? What would be your message today to them?
To other parents, to other people. You know, it's very difficult to actually, you know, because I'm a parent myself, I've got 2 children, two young kids. As a parent, I think it's quite crucial to have communication with the school, and I think it does boil down to us. We do need to maintain, you know, a certain level of communication with the school, but it's got to be a 2-way street. You know, I think if the school don't initiate it, of course, you know, we need to initiate it. In respect of our sister, my cousin, you know, for her safety, we do want her to come back. We want her to be safe. You know, we're hoping that she is safe wherever she is, wherever she may be. Ultimate thing is we need to still rely on services who can actually help us do this and bring them back safely.
Ms. Begum, what would be your message to parents and members of families in similar positions? They must be very, very anxious, especially the parents at that school. It's a big school, is it not?
It is a big school.
Lots of young girls
It's
are
a
there.
very respectable school. Both my sisters have gone there, and we've never had any complaints about the school. They're an amazing school. They're high achieving. they get all the support they need in terms of bringing them up to the potential that they have. But just in terms of, I feel so let down by the police, because we gave them everything. Every step of the way, we gave them all information, and they were just feeding back information that we had given them. My liaison officer was the liaison officer that handed them the letter. I think it's completely ridiculous that now then they assigned him to the same case, because ethically I don't think it's right. That question kept coming up, why did you not hand the letters to the girls? Now his response was, we didn't have contact details. The school were very helpful. When I went to the school to take my sister to school, obviously she has to carry on, I asked the school, did you provide contact details? They said yes, on the day we provided contact details. They were happy.
So just to be clear, that was in December?
Yes.
This was in December, so the school handed them the contact details, and I believe the school. Now the liaison officer kept turning around and saying paperwork was being pushed around. I don't like the idea of thinking my mother's address is being pushed around here to there.
Thank you. Mr. Abbasi, if you had a message to give to other parents in the community like yourself, what would it be following the awful circumstances that you've had to put up with over the last week?
Simply, I would say, be vigilant, not to fall on the same trap we fall.
Mr. Akunjee, finally with you, you've given us two of the things that you want: an apology from the police, a new liaison officer. Is there anything else that could help the families and that could point us to the way in which the PREVENT strategy could work in the future?
Sure. I mean, just in terms of safety of children, last year, I think under Schedule 7, we managed to stop, for no reason at all, 60,000 people and ask them questions. But this year, we have 3 15-year-old girls who somehow should have been stopped, but managed to get on a plane and go abroad. So I think that's a key issue there. And that's just out of pure safety for children, not just within the terrorism context, but in terms of just child safety. In terms of the future, I think that from my experience of the PREVENT strategy, is that none of these girls, none of the 7, appeared on any sort of high-level on any list, yes, within the PREVENT criteria. It is my view that it is a defunct document. It is also self-contradictory in places. I would suggest that new partners in government are sought to actually get a clear read on what the situation on the ground is, rather than, frankly, some of the organisations that are feeding into PREVENT are simply feeding in information that is reflexive of nightmares.
Do you think more should have been done to get them back once they were in Turkey? Do you feel it was not muscular enough in terms of the efforts?
I think the problem here is how do we look at these kids and these families? You know, it appears that they just simply weren't taken seriously or looked at seriously, because there was no real effort behind the communication structures. I've worked on cases in terms of the terrorism context where a person has got on a plane, on flight to Turkey. The family have then called the police, the same way that this family did, and there is a response team waiting on Turkey's side, you know, deflecting them back, and that's within 2 hours. That is capable, and that is proved through previous experience and previous cases in a similar context. That simply didn't happen here, and the idea that the police are saying we told them 24 hours later, and Turkey is saying 3 days, 24 hours is an unacceptable period of time.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn has
a brief one. How do you expect the police to have advanced knowledge that these girls have been radicalised when their family didn't say anything?
Indeed. Well, I think that would be because the first girl was known to the police to have gone over to Syria. The police knew this in December, and they were already speaking to these other girls and then giving letters to them, asking them to be, you know, questioned formally by their parents. So they were clearly within the nexus of interest on these issues.
Thank you.
The minute where they disappear, surely the police would have thought, oh, here we go, their December girl has gone off to Syria. We know this, the police.
What you're saying, there was no connection made?
How did the police get the information they disappeared?
Sorry, how How did
I
the
mean,
police
when? How quickly after they went did the police realise
I
they
think it was
disappeared?
midnight on the
I think
17th.
we've had evidence of that. It was
right,
Tuesday.
okay.
Mr. Lawton.
Isn't there also a role at the airport here? I remember a couple of years ago, my then 16-year-old daughter was returning from Portugal, and she was detained the other side, arriving at Gatwick Airport, and I received a phone call, which is slightly embarrassing because at the time I was Minister for Children, before they would release her to me. That was absolutely right.
Yes.
But surely there should be some reciprocal questions asked at the check-in when you've got 3 children unaccompanied going on a plane, that questions could have been asked as to exactly why are you unaccompanied getting on a plane? Is there something more to it than that? Do you think some more checks could have happened by the airlines?
So is that on the Turkey side?
No, when they checked in at the airport here.
Well, I think in terms of check-in, we've all had that experience, I'm sure, in terms of putting your passport through and having a computer read your face. And one of the girls was actually using someone else's passport. How she got through that is a failure in the actual software or the computer mechanism there. So it wasn't even the same passport.
But there's the passport check-in, and now, of course, you can do it electronically in many cases. But when you have face-to-face contact, which I presume they did,
Indeed.
with the Turkish Airlines desk, and when the member of staff working there checked their details and saw that there were 3 unaccompanied children, should there not automatically have been questions asked as to why are 3 15 and 16-year-olds travelling unaccompanied? What is the purpose of their visit?
I absolutely agree with that. From my experience in airports, I think the staff there are under a fair bit of pressure, given the amount of volume that goes, and their main questions are, does your luggage fit the actual standard size? That's really more their focus. They're looking downwards and not upwards. So those are
But you agree with Mr. Lawton that should have been better checks?
Absolutely. When it comes to the safety of children, it should be our primary concern.
Ms. Blackwood, I'm just about to close.
I want to ask Mr. Akunjee, you said that you'd been involved in cases before where there was a very quick response.
Indeed.
Where a child or an unaccompanied minor had
It wasn't
gone
a child or
abroad.
a minor. It was a young adult.
A young adult. In what context was that case? Was it a missing child? Was it an abduction
It was a
case?
terrorism case.
It was a terrorism case. So there have been cases where the system has worked.
Of course.
What do you think was different about this case? Why do you think it didn't work this time?
Well, personally, and I have been critical in this particular case, because there's just no communication across the board, either with the families or with those agencies in the airports where they should make checks and communicate information about small children boarding planes, or indeed the police and the communications or lack of through the post.
And was the case that you were involved with before involving Turkey itself?
It was, yes.
Okay.
Thank
Can
you.
I just ask
Yes,
one
of
more
course.
question? Mr. Hussain, I was very worried when I heard you say that even now you wouldn't know what symptoms to look for radicalisation. I just wanted to ask all of you, do you feel that there's enough being done to make parents aware of what the indicators are of radicalisation? So if they see these things, they can the alert can go up and they can say, okay, there's a problem here. And secondly, that they would know where to go to or what to do.
Mr. Abbasi?
Mr.
You agree
Mr.
with
Hussain,
Nicola Blackwood?
Do you think that there is enough being done to make sure that people are aware of the indicators?
Yeah.
There is enough being done or there isn't?
No.
No.
there isn't.
Okay.
Ms. Begum?
I have the same view. I don't think there is enough being done. If people were more aware of, if parents were more aware of things to look out for, then maybe, the parents would keep an extra eye on their kids.
And do you think that should be coming from, where do you think is the best route for that to come from? From schools, from community groups, from the police? Where's the best, where's the most trusted group? So
I think schools would be the most trusted group because we trust them enough to send our kids there.
Okay.
So,
do you agree, Mrs. East?
I agree, because the children are obviously spending the best part of their day in school. As far as I'm aware, because I have 2 children going into 2 different schools, and given following our situation, now Tower Hamlets are actually kind of delivering certain kind of workshops and things like that within the borough.
Okay.
So I think we can be hopeful that things are going to improve.
Thank you.
For other
So they need
families.
to, schools need to have a clearer line of responsibility in
Absolutely.
preventing terrorism, but also to know more clearly what their role is in terms of parental consent when police are involved in counter-terrorism activities.
Ms Aziz, Mrs Begum, Mr Abbasi and Mr Akunjee, thank you very much for coming here. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the session. We have the Commissioner and the Turkish Ambassador. Thank you very much. Order, order. We will just have a change of witnesses. Mr Rowley, thank you very much. I'm sorry we're running a tiny bit late. We're most grateful. Commissioner, this is part of your I was going to say normal visit to the Select Committee, but it is when we examine you from time to time on various issues. Mr Rowley is here for the first part of the evidence session where it deals with counter-terrorism. And we will then go on to other issues such as U-Tree and other matters. We have just heard what can only be described as damning evidence by the families of the 3 girls who have gone to Syria. Severe criticisms of the way in which the Metropolitan Police have acted, a failure to communicate with the families, a failure to hand letters to families which might have alerted them to the fact that the girls might go to Syria. We heard evidence that a liaison officer tried to get the families not to listen to the advice of a solicitor. And at a time when I suppose the Metropolitan Police need to be reaching out to communities, here was a big opportunity for the police to be able to show, in particular to the Muslim community, that they were on their side and they were trying to stop this radicalisation and try and discover where these girls had gone. Do you want to, at the start, take the opportunity to say anything on behalf of the police in respect to the way in which this case has been dealt with? The family want an apology because they think things could have been handled much better. What would you like to say about that, Commissioner?
Well, first of all, we're sorry if the family feel like that, and clearly it's a terrible situation they find themselves in, having lost their daughters in such a horrible way. And as a, you can only half imagine what a parent is going through at this time. So in that sense, I'm sorry that they're in that situation. I'm also sorry that the letter that we intended to get to them didn't get through, because clearly that failed. It was intended for them and it failed, and for that, of course, we're sorry. I don't think we would go as far as saying therefore that caused the girls to go, and that it didn't. There was anything more we could have done to prevent that, because at the beginning we were trying to get from these girls information about a further young woman who had actually left in December. That was the principal reason for us talking to that family. With hindsight, obviously we now know that these girls were planning to go, and neither the family, the police, the school, nor anyone else realised that. So that's, I think, the sequence of events, but the circumstances the parents find themselves in, of course, is a terrible situation, and they must be worried sick about how their girls are.
They are, and thank you very much for that apology. I think that will go a long way to helping restore trust. Nobody's suggesting that if they'd got the letter in December that somehow we would not be sitting here today talking about these 3 girls. The issue for the parents and the families is if they'd had the letter, they would have been alerted to the possibility that something might have happened to them. Because I've spoken to the school earlier today, they were very clear that they were under instructions from the Metropolitan Police not to tell anyone in the school that the girl who went in December had gone to Syria. I mean, I can just imagine as a parent myself, if my child's school informed me of that, the likely reaction in my household to how to look after and how to watch and how to be very vigilant concerning my child. I'm sure that would apply to any parent. Do you accept that the core failure to communicate that letter, which is what the family said was absolutely crucial, is something that really does need to be revisited, so that in future when you have situations of this kind, the past is the past, we're thinking about the future, it is vitally important that everyone involved, schools, parents, know what is happening. It can't be necessarily kept in the shadows. Tell them the unvarnished truth and they can prepare.
I think, Chair, as you've mentioned, clearly, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sure we will, we are going back and reviewing what's happened in this case. The dilemma is often, first of all, how much privacy the individual expects, because, of course, their family may not wish for that information about a girl going to Syria to be shared. In these 3 families' cases, they haven't even had that opportunity. It's been in the public glare for obvious reasons. So I think we've always got to think about that. There's privacy for the individual involved. And then you've got to get the balance right between clearly warning people but not worrying them. So, you know, together with the school, I'm sure we will sit down and work through, could we have dealt with it better in keeping either the young people at that college informed or alternatively the families. But I don't know if Mark wants to say anything more about the letter as well.
Mr. Rowley.
Yeah, I'd add particularly about the context of it in the investigation. This was a sort of sizable investigation which continues, which starts off obviously with the first girl who went in December and then has the parallel case of the three girls who've gone more recently. Massive amounts of CCTV recovered, massive amounts of work on financial data, on communications data. And in that context, one line of inquiry, of course, was speaking to that first girl's friendship group. They were spoken to in December. Subsequently, one girl came forward with some information which was helpful, and she was seen and a statement taken and some useful material gathered. And that investigation has moved on apace. In fact, we have arrested 2 people for child abduction in relation to that first girl. And the Scottish woman who's been reported overseas, that case is well advanced in the work that's going on in terms of potentially prosecuting her if she ever returns. All those strands of work, very productive. One line of inquiry was the wider friendship group.
Sure.
And out of that came the contacts with the girls repeatedly. And the officer who followed up in February, I think, was doing a belt and braces job. They'd given very little in the first meeting at the start in December. He was determined to follow it up and go through a full interview with each of them. He met them, and it was a letter to go to parents simply to say, I'd like to have a longer conversation with your daughters. Could it have been delivered in a better way? Of course it could have been, but I think it was a very simple intention as part of a massive investigation.
Yes, it's not just that, is it? I mean, I'm not trained. You are the nation's lead on counter-terrorism. And just with common sense, if I was dealing with a school where somebody had gone to Syria and she was part of a friendship group with others, I would want to tell the parents of the others almost immediately. I would want to bring them into my confidence. I would want to explain what might happen so that they could at the very least take the passports away, which were subsequently used for these girls to travel. I wouldn't just use it as an ordinary investigation. This is a huge propaganda coup for ISIL and a big blow to the credibility of what is supposed to be, what this committee has said in the past, the best police service in the world. It needed that letter to go to the parents and the parents to be told that this was a situation, not to hand the letter to a 15-year-old girl.
It's a very simple line of inquiry and investigation, and I don't see, as you do now, that in hindsight it was obvious these girls were going to be missing. If parents can't see changes in behaviour that involves stealing from parents, changing appearance, taking hold of a sister's passport, if people in the community don't spot this, if we don't see signs of it in schools, then I think it's very hard to expect the police who are doing an investigation to spot these signs.
Of course, but you have partners in this. One of the partners is the school. But the school was told, instructed not to tell anybody. And indeed, when I spoke to the school earlier today, they went through the 7 levels of prevent, the 7 issues that need to be looked at to see whether there is an issue on prevent for a particular child, the at-risk issues. And they found that only in respect of one of the girls did one of those issues apply. So where are your partners in this if it happens again?
I'm not sure I follow the question. So the school have looked at it and they themselves have found it difficult to see any signs of radicalisation with these girls.
But the school was told not to inform anybody that this child had gone to Syria. There is a difference between radicalisation and someone actually getting on a plane and going to Turkey to join ISIL. There is a big difference between radicalisation and someone taking those steps, is there not? Or am I just
absolutely
got the wrong...
Absolutely. Clearly the first girl has made a dramatic decision and she's travelled off to Syria to join ISIS. And that is very worrying and very concerning. Now, I don't believe there was any intent to keep it secret, far from that, but there is the balance in terms of privacy, as the Commissioner has outlined. The fundamental focus has been about hunting down and trying to find that first girl. Could be worried about her safety. She's gone to a war zone. That's our biggest concern. And all those lines of inquiry have been very fruitful. They've delivered arrests, they've delivered intelligence, and as one of those lines of inquiry, we spoke to a friendship group. If somebody in the school had said there's something strange going on here, of course it would have generated more actions. But I think to expect the police doing an investigation to have a lens on these issues that families, schools and the community don't have, I think is unrealistic.
So if we look at the 3 girls, when you were notified on the Tuesday that they had gone missing, did alarm bells ring that these 3 girls were all part of the group of 7 that had been interviewed last December? Did somebody notice, my goodness, there could be a problem here, they could have gone to Turkey?
That was picked up very quickly. In terms of the sequence of events, broadly, 3 girls left their families having deceived them in terms of what they were doing that day. They get flights at lunchtime, which in Turkey by late afternoon. 2 of the families realised something was amiss that evening. The girls were already on the ground in Turkey, and the one family came to us the next morning. We, of course, were looking at these missing people, doing rapid research.
Which is the 16th?
So
Tuesday the 16th?
Yes, well, Tuesday evening and then Wednesday morning. And, of course, that research involves looking at all sorts of data and information out there, including, obviously, the pattern with the previous girl. Look for flight manifest. We find that evidence that they're flown out of the country, albeit one not in...
Did you discover who paid for the tickets?
Yes, we've got information about how the tickets were bought. Tickets were bought for a large amount of cash at a local travel agent.
And you know the travel agent?
And we know the travel agent.
Of course.
So we've worked our way through that, and so by sort of mid-afternoon, 3 or 4 o'clock, I think it is.
On the Wednesday?
On the Wednesday, we are looking to kick off inquiries in Turkey, and we make contact through the liaison officer who's situated in the Turkish embassy here in London. And we also speak to the British consulate in Istanbul.
Yes.
So we're trying to kick those inquiries off very quickly.
But why did nobody then go out there to see if they could find these girls? These are 3 young British citizens
who
had got on a plane and gone abroad. You contacted the liaison officer in London.
We had an officer on the ground the day after that. We
you sent someone out?
I have a small network of officers based in critical countries around the world doing counter-terrorism work. And we had one. We're increasing that officer based in Turkey. As it happened, it was his leave period. He cancelled down the leave period and rushed back to Turkey and was there a day or so after we reported it.
On which day?
I can't remember if it's the day after or 2 days after.
Okay. Reassuring the parents and the rest of the public who saw images of these girls go into that bus station in Turkey, they weren't in a hurry. They walked in very casually. They sat down and they waited a considerable length of time. I know you only had this footage afterwards, I understand that.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind you had 3 young British citizens who were the centre of all this attention from a school that had already sent someone to Syria, who'd gone to Syria rather than sent someone to Syria, did you not feel that more could have been done by your officer in Istanbul to try and track these 3 girls into that bus station? Because it appears that that is a well-worn route for people who want to go from the United Kingdom to Syria.
He's done an enormous amount of work with the Turkish police. The Turkish police on this investigation have really committed a significant amount of resource. They've been working very hard. I'm briefed on some very substantial progress they've made in relation to the investigation, which is very encouraging. And his relationship as a British police officer there with them is very strong. Of course, his role is to work with them and assist and ask for their help. He can't go on the ground and do surveillance and investigations. That's not lawful.
He's got to work with the Turks.
Yes.
But looking at that footage, as I did and the public did you not think, as the top counter-terrorism officer in the country, we nearly stopped them going? We could have done something else to make sure they hadn't gone, because they were sitting in that Turkish bus station for so long. The parents were obviously very upset. You had a number of officers involved. You actually could have prevented them getting to Syria.
I'm not sure I just don't think that's reasonable. I think, as Mark's indicated, whether we operate in a foreign country, we do not operate on the ground. No more than we'd expect the Turks to come and try and find someone missing from Ankara in London. It wouldn't be appropriate. But they don't have the powers, nor do we in Turkey. What we do have a duty to do is to share the information as quickly as possible to try and encourage them, among their many priorities in a huge country, to consider this a priority. Now, our best advice is that, we believe that they took some urgent action. Of course, would they be no clearer, presumably, about where these girls went after leaving the airport without making significant inquiries, like looking through CCTV? And everybody says, it's so very straightforward, until you've gone through probably 200 hours of CCTV to find these people. It takes time. So I wouldn't judge the fact that they weren't discovered early. Of course, we would all have hoped to have discovered them before they travelled to Syria. But it's a big country, and these were 3 of the people we were looking for on behalf of the British state, and I'm sure they also have many priorities. So I think from our assessment is that they've done an awful lot. Sadly, it wasn't effective.
Lessons to be learned in terms of cooperation with Turkey. They're a friendly country. We do a lot of work with them. The Turks are under huge pressure. There's foreign fighters coming from Western Europe on one border. On the other border, there's refugees coming from Iraq and Syria. Can we do more to help the Turkish government?
I think we could always say, Chairman, that we could do more.
But what more practically would you like to see happen?
Well, I'm not going to. I don't think it's easy to articulate that. You've actually set out very clearly the context in which they operate. They have a border with a warring state. They are trying to control that border. There are issues, as you know, in that border with the Kurdish population, which doesn't make it very straightforward for them. And of course, they are trying to manage a huge population, and of which this is just part of their threat. I have to say that generally we've got a good professional relationship with them as police officers and security service. We do a lot to work together, and as you say, our primary aim has been to prevent terrorism, so that we are trying to stop people, generally young men, but not only young men, leaving to become terrorists in Syria or Iraq. That's been our principal aim. This latest surge of young girls and young women going, I think we have to have an open mind about the purpose of them leaving, and is it for terrorism, or is it because they're victims? And
How
all
big
these
is the
things
surge? The figure has been put as 50 young women and girls who've gone there.
I think 22 in the last 12 months.
22 have gone in the last 12 months, I see. And these are the only parents who've come out in this way, so publicly, about the loss of their child. Is that right?
I believe so, as far as I'm aware.
And we're having good cooperation from communities. I think one of the increasing trends of the last year, which is very welcome, is community leaders from sort of Muslim communities stepping forward and really trying to help take on this, confront the sort of evil propaganda that's coming out, sort of across from ISIS. We've had 87 missing people reported to us by families who've come forward and engaged with the police because they
and just how do they report them? They don't ring the anti-terrorist line, do they? How do they do it?
It ranges from anti-terrorism line to local police calls that come in through your normal routes, and then it's down to local offices.
So 87
families have come forward. 26 of those are in relation to women. 61 of the 87 were young people under 21.
And is this trend increasing or decreasing, the number of foreigners, British citizens going to become foreign fighters?
It's been a pretty steady flow. The numbers of girls within it has tended to be one or two in a month, and then every now and again you get a month where it leaps up to be a handful and back down again. So it's a sort of fairly steady picture, but it's very concerning. They're all tragedies potentially.
Sure. Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, do you feel sometimes that the police can't win, in that from some quarters the police are accused of being too intrusive, and now it seems that in other quarters the police are supposed to know when young people are being radicalised, when perhaps family members don't know that. Do you think sometimes the police can't win?
I think, Mr. Ellis and Chair, I think it's the nature of our role. Sometimes it is quite difficult to get that balance right. I think it's quite difficult for a couple of reasons here. One is that I think all of us are, I think both governments, perhaps Parliament, we are challenged by the complexity of this ISIS attraction. I think both for terrorists and for young women, it's pretty hard to understand why they're attracted to it, and therefore it's rather hard then to have strategies to intervene in it. And this is if you just looked at London, this is a big city. There are 1.25 million Muslims who live in this great city, and just spotting the ones who are interested in travelling abroad in these horrible circumstances is hard, and then we have to intervene. Now, we've done an awful lot of work in pushing people who we believe are at risk of being radicalised. Hundreds of people have been put into the Channel programme, and it's had some success. But the scale is big. The reason, when we know that at least 700 people have already gone to Syria, and that's a minimum, not a maximum, that's the ones we know about by name, it's a real challenge. So I don't think any of us can underestimate that by complexity and by size. We're doing our best, but I think only by working together with schools and parents and others will we make a real lasting intervention here. The police are the last resort when it comes to the law.
Yeah, and talking about working with schools and parents, do you think the police went a bit wrong in this case in the letter that was written, apparently to the girls instead of to the parents? Was the letter addressed to the parents and given to the girls to pass over, or was it actually addressed to the girls? Do you know?
I'm afraid I don't.
It was expected to be given to the parents.
So was it addressed to the parents? Or was it just to
I can't remember how it's headed, but it was expected to be given to the parents.
And were the children that it was given to, because it was given to more than just these three girls, So were they told to hand it to their parents?
Yes, so there was a friendship group of 7 girls who the school identified as being the friendship group of the first girl who went from December. And it was that wider friendship group who were met in early December and then the follow-up meeting in early February.
Right. So presumably the letter could have been sent in the post, which would have, I accept, slowed it down a bit by a couple of days, but that might have guaranteed it arriving at the parents' addresses.
And as the Commissioner said, in hindsight that would have been better. Of course, after the first meeting, the Deputy Head had spoken to the parents and said there'd been a meeting with the police, and so there was some expectation that the children would pass it on, but they didn't.
And what about the money? You say you found the travel agent and they accepted money, a large sum of money in cash. How much money was it?
It's well over £1,000.
Over £1,000 in cash was handed over by 3 teenage girls.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know, can you say, how the girls got that money?
We think it's linked to theft from families.
Sorry, could you repeat
We think
that?
it's linked to taking jewellery from one of the families.
Taking jewellery from their families, is that
Yeah.
what you're saying? Right.
I see. Now, as far as the Turkish authorities are concerned, we work quite closely with the Turkish authorities, I presume, and they have substantial challenges of their own, as we do in this country. Are you happy that, generally speaking, the operation of relations between London and Ankara, as far as the police are concerned, is a satisfactory one and works well? Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, at the moment, it works well. From time to time, there will always be tensions, usually of priorities. Everybody's always got too much to do, but generally, it seems to work pretty well. The inquiries we're asking them for, which often, more recently, as we've said, are for missing girls, but have been around people arriving for terrorism, seem to be treated seriously. But it's quite a challenge to them by volume, because, of course, we're just the UK, and we've seen around Europe, we've seen hundreds and thousands of people travelling, so again through Turkey, they have quite a challenge dealing with many countries making similar requests.
Now, as far as the sequence of the girls' departure is concerned, if I understand the evidence that you've given already correctly, 2 of the girls were reported missing on the 17th of February, which was a Tuesday. And we now know that they caught a flight lunchtime of that day. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
All 3 of the girls?
Yes.
But at the time that the flight departed, one of the girls had not been reported missing.
None of them were reported missing.
None of them were reported missing at the time the flight departed.
Correct.
But 2 of the girls were reported missing later that same day, the 17th,
evening, yes.
that evening, and the flight was at lunchtime.
Yeah.
The 3rd girl was reported missing the following day. Is that right?
Following morning, that's right.
The following morning. And the police notified the Turkish authorities on that following morning, the Wednesday morning.
The afternoon.
Afternoon. And how were the Turkish authorities notified? Were they notified via the embassy in London?
We did two routes. Well, we spoke to the British consulate in Istanbul, but the main direction was, in the same way as we have police officers in liaison posts around the world, the Turks have a police officer and liaison post in their embassy, and we went through him. And
that's the normal protocol, is it?
If our overseas liaison officer hadn't been on a short break with his family, then we would have gone through that route. But it's perfectly proper to go through this route. We asked him if he'd take the inquiry and pass it on to his colleagues back home in Turkey, and he was more than happy to do so.
And that was done on the Wednesday
afternoon.
And when you say you passed information to the Turkish authorities, and for that matter to the British authorities in Istanbul, the British consul in Istanbul, did you include descriptions of the girls, perhaps photographs of them, particulars of what had occurred?
Yeah, so there was the detail. There's certainly all their personal details, because of course we want them to check any manifest for any travel within the country. Turkey have a registration system in terms of hotel and that sort of booking, so we wanted them to check against those things.
And did it include photographs?
And I think it included photographs as well. I'd have to double check that. I'm pretty sure it did.
Are you satisfied that the normal protocols were followed in terms of notifying the relevant authorities, British and Turkish, in respect of these 3 girls?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as I say, the Turks have been very helpful.
Yes.
Yes, we're all praising the Turks. David Winnick.
We will obviously ask the Turkish ambassador about what happened or didn't happen in Turkey, and moreover about the Turkish Airlines insofar as he has any responsibility, which probably he hasn't. But I take it first of all that the first lesson from all this unfortunate event is that the parents will in future, from now, be actually notified directly and the letters will not be handed over to the pupils. Is that
Bernard?
correct?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's one of the things that we learn. So, you know, in similar circumstances, each one is different, but in similar circumstances, if you take the chair's first point, how do we notify other people in the school? And secondly, how do you notify those who are closest to these girls? Then we will be reviewing how we do that in future. And we'll have to work with the schools to see how best to do it.
Indeed, and I think the general recognition what happened was a mistake. I wonder if I can just widen the position for a moment, because the PREVENT programme, of course, is to try and prevent people from being radicalised and from doing what these three did, go to a notorious outfit, ISIS, which we know is founded on terrorism and every other evil one can imagine. The criticism has been made, Commissioner, as you know, in the last few days by a former police commander who said, in fact, that there's a lack of Muslim staff in the PREVENT scheme, and that's hampering, that's his view, stopping vulnerable young people, particularly females, from travelling to Syria to join Islamic State or ISIS. Any justification in that criticism?
To some extent, yes. We have about 50,000 people, and we have 32,000 police. Within the 32,000 police, around 11% are minorities, and in terms of Muslim officers, we have over 300. So it's a relatively small percentage, given the percentage, as I've already said, 1.25 million in 8.6 in London. And then obviously that number is a smaller number by the time we get to the Counter-terrorism command. So it's a constant challenge to recruit people from different communities. So I think it's no doubt, what I think Dal Babu said, we would want more Muslims to be part of the police, and in particular this area, is true.
Yes, he's very critical, because what he says is that the programme PREVENT is, I quote what he says, is a toxic brand run mainly by white police officers with little understanding of Islam, gender or race, and feels that the people involved have little or no roots in the communities in which we are trying to support. In other words, to stop people being radicalised and engaging in terrorism and the rest. So, in effect, what can the Metropolitan Police at this stage do to meet such criticism?
Well, we'll go to Mark, but just say one quick thing. I think generally, I don't think you have to be from a group to be sensitive to and work with a certain group, whether it be a racial group, a belief group. I think the police have got to work with all groups. But I think I've already said clearly at this committee, I want better representation from all members of London. So I accept that general point. I think the second thing is obviously we do an awful lot of training to try and sensitise our officers and educate them in the beliefs of certain different people and how their cultures develop. Pretty hard in London when we know that over 300 languages are spoken, let alone all the different beliefs that there are and the various groupings within those beliefs. So I think there's a limit to how much we can train all our officers, but perhaps if Mark said a little more about what we do.
I think the first point I'd make is that in this context we risk conflating PREVENT with tackling sort of Islamism and the sort of terrorism we're talking about here. Actually, PREVENT is a much wider programme. We use it, for example, around extreme right wing and other sort of extreme ideologies. So I just make that point. I think whether the label PREVENT or not is the right label, I'll leave for others to judge that. But in terms of what do we need to do, I think whatever strategies we have in the future, we will want to work with communities to help identify people who are being radicalised, who are becoming extremist, and find ways to tackle that, whether it's policing interventions or more likely it's other providers or it's mental health services. So I can't imagine we'd ever have a strategy where we weren't looking to sort of try and prevent radicalisation and extremism. And likewise, I can't imagine we'd have a strategy where we weren't looking to the community for help in terms of their information and their support in fighting terrorism. And I see evidence of us succeeding on both of those fronts. Of course it's not perfect, and I wouldn't pretend it was. This is always going to be messy and difficult because it's a complicated issue. but recently, over the last year, we think our prevention interventions have potentially had an impact on 70 people, dissuading them from travelling to Syria. A bit of a subjective judgment there, but we can see interventions where that looks to have had that effect. We've recently doubled our work with schools and with higher education, a lot of them because of the change in legislation that Parliament has brought in, recognising their greater duties to prevent, have been looking for help, and we've been helping them with that, and police have been helping on that
David
role.
Winnick?
The police have been criticised, politicians have been criticised, but I want to ask you, both of you, to be perfectly frank. What, in your opinion, could the Muslim community itself, particularly on the religious side, in the mosque and the rest, and community leaders, what, in your view, could they do more to stop the poisoning of young people towards a form of belief which is totally Islamic, as we know, has absolutely nothing to do with the Islamic religion, but has a great deal to do with murder and evil and terrorism?
I think, for me, to do even more of what they've been doing since around August of last year. So that as ISIS swept through Iraq, we saw, and with the terrible things we saw on YouTube and on the TV, beheadings, there's no way that anybody can justify that. And what we've seen is that, you know, Muslims from various parts of branches of Islam have come forward and condemned it and said this is not about Islam. This is nothing to do with the Quran.
Indeed not.
That has got to be said clearly and repeatedly, and if I'm honest, I think there's been times when they could have spoken before and they haven't. So I think I praise their bravery, but they need to be as brave in the future. And frankly, I think also politicians have got to speak more clearly. Because this is not about, as you've indicated...
In what way should politicians speak more clearly?
Because they need to be braver about saying this is about politics and not about religion. This is about people trying to seek influence in various states. It's got absolutely, for me, very little to do with religion. That's the mask under which it hides. But the thing is about politics, and the clearer that is made, it allows those people who are promoting good faith to be clear about their role too. So for me, I think we all need to be clear and be brave enough to condemn.
We'll come back to prevent later because I have some questions on that, but let us go first to James Clapperson.
Commissioner, you rightly said a few moments ago that you find it hard to see how anybody could be attracted to the ISIS cause, and you've spoken about some of the vile activities which have taken place there. But when it comes to blaming people for what has happened, rather than the police or the wider Muslim community, surely we should be looking at the people who are responsible for radicalisation. Are you pursuing any lines of inquiry against any particular individuals who may have been involved in the radicalisation of these 3 young girls?
We've certainly got numerous lines of inquiry about people in country who are, we believe, are trying to radicalise people. Not radicalising them towards Islam, radicalising them, as you made the point,
towards extremism.
Towards terrorism. So that is a very clear line of inquiry, and we see that even in our prisons where we're trying to stop radicalisation. We're also seeing it in the community. The second area is around the internet, and I think there's some evidence that in this case, as we've already indicated, that some of the radicalisation here took place online. We're taking down around 1,000 sites a week, which we believe are contributing to that context. But that, I have to say, on the internet, that's a very small impact, but it's a very significant effort.
Are you able to get at the individuals who are behind it?
Occasionally, as we say, I think in this one case there's a link back to Scotland, so you can see that sometimes with people in country using the internet, it's pretty hard if they're abroad. But we are determined to pursue that. So to take your principal point, I think we're not just dealing with the consequences, we're trying to deal with the instigators. And the only final point, of course, it's a constant challenge for Parliament as well as for the police, because people adapt their behaviour to the law. So often they will just stay just on the right side of the law, because they're wise enough, sometimes on legal advice, to be very clear about what they mean, but not make illegal incitement. So I think it's a constant dynamic. But we do think we are having some success, but not.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. So on this case, we've made some progress with the first girl and having, say, 2 people arrested in terms of child abduction who were potentially involved in helping her leave the country. And we're making good progress on a person, a Briton who's overseas in Syria, influencing people over Facebook and the internet. Also, in more generally, we have been looking at sort of people who are extremists in communities, as the Commissioner described, and trying to find evidence where they are stepping over that line from being unsavoury to being illegal. And we've got one big investigation ongoing which we're making good progress on. And we'll keep chasing people down. We have a lot of people who are outside the country, maybe in Syria, who are using social media, try and radicalise others, and we try and get to a point where we're charge ready. So if they set foot in Europe or any friendly Western country, then we're ready to bring them back here and sort them out.
We've obviously seen a number of people travelling to Syria and Iraq, but in this particular case, the girls concerned, they've made a huge and terrible mistake, but they are very young girls compared with the other people. And in this particular case, without going into the other case, but in this particular case, do you have any reflections on how we could get them back safely to this country?
I think there's an important
where we are now.
There's an important thing to say here. It's every case on its merits. We have no evidence in this case that these 3 girls are responsible for any terrorist offences. I think that's important. So they have no reason to fear that if there's nothing else comes to light, no reason to fear that we'll be treating them as terrorists if they come back to this country.
In other words, if they return, they will not be returning to jail. They can return to their families.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying
Yes.
today?
Yes.
And that's your clear statement to them?
Absolutely.
I'm not suggesting they're watching the proceedings of the Home Affairs Select Committee. But if the message goes out that if they return, there are no terrorism issues here.
Yeah.
But I think it's a vitally important point because we've been challenged in the past that when people have gone, we believe for terrorism, sometimes they've changed their mind.
Sure.
Do you encourage them to come back or do you condemn them to stay there? But in this case, it's very clear.
There's a difference between the person who has been running around northern Iraq and Syria with a Kalashnikov and then has a touch of the seconds and wants to come back and apologise. That's very different to 3 young girls who we have no evidence to suggest they're involved in terrorism.
Colleagues, we have the vote coming up shortly. If we can do the terrorism section, then release Mr. Rowley. Tim Lawton.
So to be clear, you're viewing these girls as victims rather than perpetrators, to make that absolutely clear.
We always stay open-minded throughout it, but at the moment we have no evidence and no reason to suspect they are.
Can I just go back to the mechanics of their journey? Notwithstanding Mr. Ellis's comment about the police can never win on this, can you just remind me of the journey they took?
So they've gone, they've flown from Gatwick to Istanbul and then they've gone across land from there.
To?
I can't recall the names of all the cities and things.
Well, we think they went to Gaziantep, is that not right? By a bus?
I can't recall.
Okay, which is having been there, that is the obvious route across a very porous border into Syria. So what I just want to concentrate on is that time between them disappearing and arriving in Istanbul and them arriving on the Syrian border by a very open and conventional route. And why were steps not taken that might have intercepted them between being way up in the north of Turkey and way down in the south of Turkey on the obvious way to get from Istanbul to, if it was Gaziantep or Diyarbakir or one of those places along that border, having been there, where the airports are shut most of the time, so the bus journey is the obvious way to go. So when you got that intelligence, that you would have liaised with the Turkish police, and the first place, surely, they would have gone to would be a bus station, as we now know they were there. Would that not be the logical priority to then eliminate their routes and try and intercept them?
I think there are many routes people can take, but I don't think it's right for me to try to explain all the work the Turks have done in support of this case to try and identify where the girls were.
Coming back to this country, it's perhaps something we'll take up with the Turkish ambassador. Coming back to this country, people going from this country, usually as loners, into Syria is quite a high-profile issue at the moment, is it not?
Yes.
Young girls, in particular, going missing, nothing to do with terrorism, but to do with recent cases about child sexual exploitation, is a high-profile issue at the moment, is it not?
Of course.
So therefore, having a group of young, vulnerable girls disappearing should be triggering alarm bells very quickly, should it not?
Yes.
Right.
Sorry.
So here we have, what the point I'm trying to make is here we have high-value targets in these girls who clearly, for child sexual exploitation issues or possible terrorism-linked issues going to Syria, should have been way up there on the radar as a high priority the minute their absence became known. And yet, were they?
Well, their absence became known after they'd flown.
Sure.
I mean, it's a general...
At which point they become number one priority dealing with your colleagues in Turkey in order to try and intercept them, which is we're not clear that that actually happened.
But I think there's a general point, which I think you'll make as well, which is that as young unaccompanied children, young people, particularly perhaps girls, travel perhaps to Turkey, how much notice is taken of that in the general transport through airports? Now, of course, as you know, the government, the government of various hues don't have exit controls. So there is no general control at the airports or the seaports. And then so therefore, you're falling back on two opportunities. One is the airlines themselves, and number two is obviously the possibility that our officers who are based at the airports could we intervene if we see something suspicious. But if you take Gatwick or you take Heathrow, and tens of thousands, millions of people who travel through these places, unaccompanied children travelling is not as unusual as we might imagine. But some countries do have regulations in place to regulate that.
But is that not the point, Commissioner, that great work has been done on child sexual exploitation, I'm using this as an analogy, with notifying hotels, so that if they suspect when girls turn up with odd people, there's a notification. Should not the same work have been going on already, given the high profile of this, with travel agents? When you get cash, and apparently the passengers give date of births as being 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, with airline desks at airports, where, however unusual it may be, it is still fairly unusual for 3 unaccompanied 15 and 16-year-olds to arrive at a Turkish Airlines desk in the middle of term time, unaccompanied, going to a country where we know is high risk for people going for these purposes. Is work being done with those airlines so we don't have those passport controls? That's another issue. But people who do come face to face with these high value targets ask questions.
Well, I think the first question is, I think your question suggests some research to see how frequent it is. Because if it's so regular that we would be inundated by the worried whale travelling, then of course we won't be able to intervene. But I think your question is a good one. What more could we do? Because of course many people can book on the internet. They don't have to go to a travel agent. And once they know that travel agents may report, they will avoid it. They can turn up at an airport and buy a ticket, which is often one indicator of unusual travel. So I think the question is a good one. What more could we do, particularly with travel arrangements to spot these youngsters? But it's not, I have to say, for us, we've been quite surprised at how many young people travel unaccompanied to very young ages. And there's certainly at least one country where the only way that a 13 to 17-year-old can travel is, I think it's Portugal, with a notarized support of their parent. Now, I'm not arguing that that should happen here. I merely remark that many countries of the world, young people travel routinely and rely on the airline for their safety.
My 16-year-old went unaccompanied to Portugal and back, and the only time she was detained was by immigration at Gatwick Airport coming back. But do you not take my point that if it's not happening already, urgently it should be happening, and whether it's over the internet they are booking, then it's the travel companies at the other end of the internet who have to get those details about date of birth, who have to get those details about passport numbers, should still be asking questions as well.
The Home Office are looking at two things. Sorry,
just a little. I think your general point is right. Now, the only caution I'll put in this is if the police get inundated with hundreds or thousands of these requests a day, for us to check out the validity of the sincerity of that travel, that will be impossible.
But we're not talking about hundreds of thousands, are we?
Well,
remember, in order to pay online...
We don't know. We don't know.
Well, in order to pay online, you need to have a credit card for which you need to be over 18.
Yeah.
So, again, these are all sorts of...
A broad point is, we don't know. What I do know is there are many youngsters travelling. What I don't want to be faced with every day is a huge list of, can we check out these young people, or frankly, UKBA. So I agree with your general point. I'm not disagreeing with that.
I think
a pragmatic approach.
I think it would be helpful if you wrote to us in the future about this. Nicola Blackwood and then Paul Flynn.
Assistant Commissioner Rowley, I just wanted to follow up on a comment that you made right back at the beginning of the session, where you said that 2020 hindsight is 2020, and if the parents, school and local community couldn't spot the signs of radicalisation, how could police officers? But obviously in the evidence that we heard prior to you coming in, Mr Hassan said, well, he wouldn't know what the symptoms of radicalisation were anyway, and this was echoed by the other family members. And it's also something that we heard from Thomas Evans's family, who of course is a foreign fighter who went off to Somalia to fight with Al-Shabaab. And so the question here is, what more can be done to communicate to family members the indicators of radicalisation, and what might give parents and family members the signs of radicalisation? And in this particular case, when it was known that one child in the school had gone to Syria, even if that particular piece of information couldn't be communicated out to other families, why was sort of more general information about these are the signs and things to look out for not communicated out to the families in the school more generally? And do you have the mechanism to do that quickly and in a targeted manner? That was several questions, but
yes, I'll try and cover that ground. So firstly, in terms of the sort of signs, a lot of them are fairly obvious. They're about changing in attitude toward.
I'm going to stop you there. There is a division. We will start immediately when we return on your answer to Nicola Blackwood. And I will start as soon as we have a quorum. I'm sorry. The politicians have spoken clearly and called a vote. So we'll just have to wait for that. Order, order. Recommence the inquiry. Mr. Flynn, if you would hold the answer to Nicola Blackwood for a second. Mr. Flynn had a question and then we'll go back to Nicola Blackwood.
You mentioned the way that the politicians have reacted to this totally unexpected situation. None of us expected people to be radicalised in this way, and quite rightly you were critical. I think many of the questions we'd asked this afternoon are from the point of view of perfect hindsight. And I believe that what I'd like to ask you is, we had three very intelligent young women here who plotted in a very devious way, in a very intelligent way, collected the money together and managed to completely deceive their parents. Do you think in those circumstances it's sensible to be critical of the police, and are we expecting of the police a level of efficiency that's unreasonable and unobtainable?
I think there's a limit, but I have to be careful. I'm not too defensive and say, well, we can't blame the police. We've got our role to play, and if we've got information, I would expect professionally that we act on it. But I think we can see the horrible situation the family are in. I'm sure that they must have replayed many times. Could we have spotted something here? And I don't think it is easy. I think what we know is that we see that people who do leave, often they are more strictly observe their religion. They often say things which people start to worry a little bit about their interests and who they support. That's a natural, almost a political thing, let alone a radicalisation thing. I think there are things that we can, the point was made to us, what more could we do to encourage schools and parents? What do you look for? So I think looking for people who are becoming more devout, but in a, there's nothing wrong with being devout, but there seems to be something where it's a change of behaviour very quickly. I think it's worth spotting. Secondly, I think particularly young people, control to finance, if that's possible. And thirdly, control of passports.
Do you think there's
those three things?
Yes, thank you very much. Do you think there's a danger in trying to seek perfection in these incidents? It's one incident, and there's a series. It's many incidents, hundreds are going on, to try to seek a judgment on the things that went wrong, and things always go wrong. In this occasion, we're in danger of making the police risk-averse and less efficient rather than more efficient.
There's certainly a possibility because the numbers are not big. We've talked, each one is a disaster for the family, but they're not very big given that we've talked about broadly 700 people. It's still a relatively small number of people. So there is a danger that we concentrate our resources on where relatively few people are affected. But the difficult thing is, we're talking here about one of these girls being 15. This is, as I think has already been said, this is a pretty disastrous outcome, in our view, for this girl now being in a place where no one can easily recover her. All the other two girls who were with her at 16, that's a pretty disastrous outcome because we all believe that they're mature, they haven't got mature judgment.
And of course, this is one of, we've got over 300 investigations at the moment in the Counter-terrorism Command in London, many of which involve people aspiring to or plotting to kill people. Now, this investigation is very important, but has to be set in that context. And I do take your point about a doctrine of perfection. If we have a public standard which is either an operation is completely perfect or it's completely awful, then I think it's a polarised and unreasonable debate.
Thank you.
I think our officers did a good piece of work here, and in hindsight, there's one or two things that could be done better, but they did a good piece of work.
Can I ask you a brief question about the Daniel Morgan case?
No, you can't, because that's not to do with terrorism. You can ask the Commissioner later.
Okay.
Just on finishing off counter-terrorism and the questions put by David Winnick, Dal Babu was pretty critical, was he not, of the way in which we're operating. He described Prevent as a toxic brand. And he raised this issue, raised by Mr Winnick, but I'm putting it to you this time, Mr Rowley, rather than the Commissioner, that at the top of Counter-terrorism Command, there were people who don't really understand the community, and they don't understand, in respect of Islamic radicalisation, what to do with them. Do you accept that? Because clearly, you will not know all the details of this, will you?
I wouldn't claim to be an expert on the history of Islam. No, I wouldn't. But I don't see Prevent as a toxic brand. I have a counter-terrorism command that is pretty much as diverse as the rest of the Met, and we know that needs to improve across the organisation, but we're not opposed to that. We're very determined to follow that lead in the work the Commissioner has pushed across the organisation. And actually, there are two different views about Prevent, but fundamentally we are seeing more people stepping forward, more people giving information to the police, more families coming to us looking for help. So I see a lot of evidence of trust in the police. I also see some challenging debate, and that's perfectly understandable.
But we don't expect you to be an expert in Islam, but what Dal Babu put, and this is not a surprise question because it was on the front page of the Evening Standard yesterday, would you know the difference between Sunnis, Shias and Salafis?
There's the issues about the sort of original...
would you know the difference between those groups?
There's a difference between the original succession around Muhammad and the different beliefs on the sort of who would take the lead following his death, and that has created a sort of a schism which has lasted an awful long time.
And you think that is what's going on here? This is the schism that started 1400 years ago?
No, I don't at all. You asked me a question about Islam, and I've given you a very basic answer because I don't tend to be an expert. This is about a small group of people who are behaving more like a cult than a religion. It has the same degree of mischief, it has the same degree of violence. They're using propaganda to get people to follow them, and to focus the debate on the terrorism we're focusing on, whether senior police officers have a sophisticated knowledge on the difference between Shia and Sunni Islam, I think is the wrong place.
But do you not take his point that actually, which the Commissioner seems to have taken, that you need more people from the community within Counter-terrorism Command so that you are able to get within the community not as agents, as some of the community think Prevent is, but as people who are on the same side. We want the Muslim community to
100%. Regard
us as being on the same side, don't we?
100%. We want the Counter-terrorism Command, just like we want the Met, to be reflective of London. We want it to be 40% from sort of different minority groups. And as you know, we've changed our recruitment criteria across London to be more reflective of London. We're pushing the boundaries as far as we can do, and some of us have argued in the past that actually we could go further if the law was changed. So I'm very keen on it.
And people like Mr Babu could actually be helpful, because he wrote a report about this which has not yet been implemented, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, Dal has been a great Chief Superintendent for the Met, doing a great job, and if he says something, it usually is quite sound. He's got good judgment. So I will listen to what he said. I don't agree with him entirely for the reasons Mark's set out. I think it's quite a narrow point to make about can people differentiate between Sunnis and Shias.
I'm just putting to you what he put yesterday.
I realise, but I think to be fair to Dal as well, I think somebody was asking me for advice. It seems to me if somebody asks for advice, they're seeking to get information and be educated. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think to say, well, that means that people just don't understand. I think, of course, you need to understand, but I don't think you should condemn people for asking for some information.
Now, just closing this section on the families, Mr Rowley, I think there's work to be done. I think somebody should meet the families and try and restore that trust that they need, because they need the Metropolitan Police, and the Metropolitan Police needs to work with this family. There are particular issues which you can see in the transcript of the hearing that need to be addressed, but I'm sure you'd want to move forward with the full confidence of the family in this particular case, which is actually not there at the moment.
We absolutely do. I think we have the same aim. We have the same aim, which is those 3 teenage girls. We want them back in London, don't we?
We do. Mr Rowley, thank you very much. I know you have other work to do. Unfortunately, we're going to keep the Commissioner a little bit longer to talk about other issues. I know Mr. Flynn wants to raise Daniel Morgan, but could I raise... thank you, Mr. Rowley. Thank you so much. Could I raise the U-Tree investigation, the evidence given to us last week by Paul Gambaccini, the whole issue of 28 days for bail, particularly on U-Tree? Do you have any figures for this committee as to the current costs, the number of arrests and the number of people who are still on bail?
In terms of the amount of cost, I think it's around £3.5 million at the moment. I think we have around 20 police officers who are dedicated to that particular inquiry. At the moment, we've got, in terms of the investigation, we've have 5 convictions. We've got 1 man awaiting trial. We have 2 charged but not convicted. And we have a further 10 where no further action was taken. Of the ones who were charged and convicted, they've all received substantial prison sentences ranging from 5 years and 9 months to 16 years.
In respect to Mr. Gambaccini's evidence to us, I'm not suggesting that you have seen it or you have read the transcript, but he was...
To be fair, Chair, I have read that this morning. You
have. Thank you very much for that. He was pretty critical of U-Tree. He said if it was a football team, it would have been relegated by now. And he was very upset at the fact that he'd paid over £200,000 in legal fees. And at the end of the day, his reputation has been damaged on a complaint that he says was fictitious. Do you think that there is a case to limit bail so that there's not this continual renewal of bail?
I think so, although I think just a couple of things I might mention before that, and I'll come directly to the point, if this is okay. I think even if we stop bail, or we restrict bail by time, that wouldn't, under the present legal system, stop the investigation. So we would say, right, we'll release you from bail, but we will still carry on and investigate, and then we may arrest you again. So I think we have to be realistic about that reality. Secondly, I think if we do start to put artificial time limits in, they will be challenged by difficult cases. Now, of course, Mr. Gambaccini makes the point that he's a difficult case and he feels he was badly treated by the present system. But if we put timelines in there, that could be quite difficult. You know that the Home Office have made 2 proposals. One is to limit bail to 28 days, which I honestly think is unworkable. And
Is or isn't workable?
It's unworkable.
Unworkable. So you agree with the DPP in this?
Yes. I just think practically, even to get a file together to give to CPS to get it back to us, it just doesn't work.
What should the time limit be then?
Certainly, the other proposal, which is 28 days plus an extension of 3 months by a senior officer, and then a magistrate's court, I think is more workable. But if it was me, I'd go for a 6-month period. And I think seriously before putting it before a magistrate's court for 2 reasons. If you limit it to 3 months, we'll be taking some of the time when someone's on bail to prepare the case to go back for an extension of bail. There is a case to make to a magistrate, so I think we have to be careful with that. When I've looked at our figures, then I've seen that 85% of the cases, the bail is extended only to 6 months. It seems to me for the majority of cases, that would have excluded the majority. So if there's to be a time limit, I would argue for 6, not 3. But I would be very careful about putting these time limits on. And the final case is that you could alter the system in one way, which is to say continue with the present one, but allow the defence to go to court to stop the bail if they think it's been abused.
Thank you. Julian Huppert and then Paul Flynn.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions I'd like to ask. The first one is a follow-up on a question that I asked you 2.5 years or so ago, where I asked if you had £1.8 billion to spend over 10 years to improve policing, counter-terrorism, make the country safer. How would you spend it? And you said your 2 main areas were improving neighbourhood and community policing and better use of technology. You talked about moving from green screen towards iPads and ANPR and things like that. Would that still be your answer on how you would use extra funding?
No, because those 2 areas we've addressed. So we're just getting up to, in fact this Friday we'll be back to 32,000 police, having dropped to 30,000, despite saving £600 million. And what that means is that we can put 2,600 more officers into neighbourhood policing. And in terms of technology, one of the benefits of being in London, although we are suffering a recession and losing revenue, we are selling buildings and getting capital. So we're taking that capital and investing in technology. So we've yet got to spend that money wisely, but at least we are accumulating that money really. So the areas I would now concentrate on, if the same question has been asked, is around counter-terrorism. And also anything that we can do to maximise what we've already talked about in terms of diversity. because we saw in PSNI that when they wanted to change radically in the way that I honestly believe we need to, then some radical financial adjustments had to be made. And so for me, those would be two big changes.
Well, very interesting that you've managed to achieve the 2 targets from 2.5 years ago. Can I then move on to another issue? Because some money, of course, has been spent presumably on water cannons that are currently stored. How much has been spent so far?
From memory, so if I apologise to get this wrong, but I think it's $250,000.
$250,000 spent so far. And you presumably saw the comments from Bill Bratton recently, who I think was considered for your job, saying that water cannon have a horrific history and would not even be considered for use in America.
I'm not sure I agree with Bill on either point, because I think they have them available in America, but in any case, I'm not sure what the horrific history is.
Well, I mean, his quote was, because of the horrific history of using water hoses during the civil rights era of the 1960s, that's anathema that we just don't use or contemplate using anywhere in America.
If I'm honest, I'm not sure I'd take public order policing advice from America.
He was considered for your job,
wasn't he? The specifics in terms of water cannon, it is not an attractive option. I've always, we would always concede that. But when considering that option, you have to consider the alternatives, which involve fists, piece of metal, CS spray, baton rounds, and the final denouement, a weapon, a firearm. So I think there are none of these attractive alternatives, including our horse and dogs. So I think it's an alternative. It's not the only one, and it's one of the arsenal of things that we would argue ought to be in reserve. But we await the Home Secretary's decision to see whether or not that will be licensed. But of course, the Mayor and Deputy Mayor have approved its purchase.
Indeed, and it's £250,000. And if that figure is incorrect, if you could write to us with an update.
I will check with you, but I think there were about 80,000 each. They are second hand.
And there's really storage costs and things like that as well.
No, it's all our property.
And then the last thing is about deletion of DNA records. You'll be aware of the Protection of Freedoms Act, and that, for example, people who've been wrongfully arrested can apply for deletion. The Met on its paperwork highlights the fact that there's no statutory time limit for the early deletion unit to process requests. And indeed it does seem, from at least one example I've seen, that there is almost an active policy of waiting for quite a long time. Do you think the Met should be trying to perform early deletion promptly?
Right, I'd probably have to take advice, Dr. Pitt, if you don't mind, because I'd be surprised if we're not following the law on this or the practice, but I'd be interested in any cases you have, if you feel that we're not...
I have written to your office about one in particular.
Right.
It's correct to say there is no statutory time limit to process early deletion requests.
No.
But perhaps you could have a look at practice and write to us.
I will. And if there are
I think most of us would expect early to mean early.
But sorry, did you say that you had already written about one case?
Yes, but I will send a copy.
All right, well, I'll have a look, because I will have seen it.
Thank you.
Recall it, I'm sorry.
Paul Flynn has a quick question on Daniel Moore.
Today is the 28th anniversary of the murder of Daniel Morgan, who came from Llanfrecffa, which is on the border of my constituency. I realise the matter has been handed over to an independent group under Baroness Nuala Olome, but she has put out a statement on behalf of the group asking for more information, which is possibly pretty optimistic after 28 years. We know the case involved police corruption that had been admitted freely at the time. While it's out of your hands at the moment, with that in mind, and having read the report on Operation Tiberius, the deeply shocking report, is there more, do you think, that the police can do? Is there anything in the police history that would give some explanation to Daniel's brother, Alistair Morgan, and the rest of the family, of why this terrible crime took place, and to bring the people to book who were responsible for it, both in the criminal world and in the police?
Well, first of all, Mr. Flynn, I know you've campaigned on this for a while, and I agree with you, it's a terrible state of affairs. That man's been murdered, his murderer has not been convicted, well, discovered and convicted, and the police were involved in corruption around it. So that's an awful state of affairs, where we agree. If any more information is made available, I guarantee that we will act on it. As you are also probably aware, there's a bit of a legal block in one sense, because of course there was I think it was in, forgive me, but I think it was in February of last year,
yes,
where a court case was halted, and consequently that particular trial stopped. It caused real problems, and if you remember, the judge at the time said he was concerned with so much material that the duty for disclosure he thought may be an impossible challenge to overcome. But my guarantee would be, if it's at all possible, then we should pursue a murderer.
Okay, just a small point. I mean, are you really satisfied that the stables has been cleansed as far as the terrible period of Operation Tiberius and his death is concerned? But are there still elements in the police that are still having an influence in suppressing the truth?
I think in terms of this case, I believe that the people who had been involved with it in the way that you've described are no longer there. And as you're probably also aware, the National Crime Agency have been asked to carry out an investigation to see whether or not they can pursue that.
David
on the 13th of January, when the Deputy Mayor of London gave evidence, it was pointed out that 10 young people had so far been murdered in the first few days of this year. And then, of course, more recently, there's been the terrible tragedy of a boy aged 15 stabbed to death on the 27th of February, cycling with friends. What is the latest situation overall? As I understand the position over the case which I just mentioned, some have been arrested. Am I not right?
Yes. Overall, first of all, every murder is terrible, particularly when it's involving a young person. So no matter what the numbers I'm about to tell you, everyone is pretty awful. There's no doubt in the first 3 months of this year we have seen a slight increase. And of course, as you said, then we've seen some young people and they've been victims of knife crime. So that's a horrible outcome. If you compare the last 3 years to the previous 3 years, we've seen a 22% reduction in murder overall. If we were to take a 4-year sample, it would be a 25% decrease. Within that, I'm not going to try and quote every year, but certainly if we went back to 2008, 22 young people, I think, died, and that went down to 8 last year, but 5 at the beginning of this. So I think what we're seeing is a general trend down, but these last 5 are worrying. So we are now in the process of reinvigorating our work around gangs, which has been very powerful, and also around stop search. Now, one of the things I would say about stop search, we've reduced it by 2/3, but we are going to target, we probably need to look at, are we targeting the right people, particularly around the carrying of knives.
Where these murders take place, in the main, would it be right to say that people have been duly charged?
Yes, I think of the 26 cases, we've arrested 25 people and there are 22 charges. Our detection rate for murder is around 95%, which compared to many other big cities in the world we're often compared with is usually about 1 in 3. So broadly, if you commit murder in London, you are convicted.
But gangs remain a problem, do they not, in various parts of the city?
We've done it. I think we can be proud that we've done an awful lot. We've put 1,200 officers into fighting the gangs. I always said at the beginning, because it was the first gang that I arrived 3 years ago, I said that I wanted us to have a gang command. I acknowledge there was a problem and do something about it, but it won't be solved even in a few years. There are 2 things. We're going to have to enforce the law harshly, and that's what we're doing. So there's about, at any one time, about 1,200 of them under either locked up or under judicial restraint. And the second thing is, if they will, then we will divert them. And we
Thank you.
do that with ruthlessness.
Michael Ellis is the final question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, can I just ask you a couple of points? First of all, on the issue of bail and connected to bail, the evidence that we've been hearing from Mr. Gambaccini, for example, what do you think of the point of anonymity pre-charge? Do you think that it should be the case that people should be, their names and identities should not be disclosed before they've even been charged by the police?
Yes, in short. I think that's got to be the position for me. We've received criticism over this last few years that we should have named people. And as a result of naming people, I think what Mr. Gambaccini described as the flypaper process, so that others who might have been victims would have the confidence to come forward, particularly when that person was in public life or was a public figure. So we've resisted that. What is also true is that some people have apparently been identified. We've continued to refuse to confirm it, but their names have still been published. But in general, we prefer that they are not identified, with one exception. And the area we accept is, say for example, there was a murder today, and we know that that murderer has a list of names that they are working their way through, or a family, we would notify
if there's an ongoing threat
as a general public safety issue. But on the whole, because what you're trying to achieve is a balance We've got to preserve the opportunity for justice to be objective, and that isn't served best, we argue, by naming a person only after arrest when the test is only suspicion.
The test for arresting someone is very low, and many would say rightly so. A constable needs just mere suspicion in order to arrest someone. And therefore, before they've even been charged, disclosing the name of a person can lead to serious reputational damage, which later doesn't even lead to a criminal charge being levied, never mind a conviction. And so the short answer is, save in exceptional circumstances where there's a threat to the general public that's ongoing, you would say, no, there should be anonymity pre-charge.
Yes.
As far as, sorry, if I just may briefly, on the issue of, some talk about adopting a statute of limitations in this country, as is applied in some jurisdictions. Do you think there ought to be any form of statute of limitations on any type of criminal offence?
I think without that, because this country has never had it, many countries do, is that what you are faced with often is very old allegations and very old investigations that you will challenge me about how long did it take. Why did it take so long to discover the most obvious of evidence, when the reality is that in many of these cases, discovering things from 20, 30, 40 years ago proves a real challenge. It's not so much that you need to feel sorry for the police. The test is whether or not it's possible to have a fair trial. And I think that's one point that has to be considered. But I think in the most serious, excuse me, for the most serious of crimes, I think it will always be the case that there will be no bar to prosecution. And the only bar in time that we have at the moment is, of course, for summary offences, where, of course, there is a 6 months bar for something which can only be prosecuted in a magistrate's court.
Thank you. Now, my final question to you is this. Crime rates are down in the Metropolitan Police Force area. Are your police numbers down? And how have you done it?
Well, we had 3.5 years where we had to find £600 million of savings. We are nearly done that by selling a third of the buildings, losing a lot of managers, and we've had 3,500 police staff either made redundant or left early. That has allowed us to recruit, and as I say, this Friday, within a few weeks, we will be back from, we were 32,000 hours arrived, we got down to 30,000, but this next few weeks we're back to 32, and we think that's quite an achievement.
You're back to 32,000?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner, this is your last appearance before this committee, before Parliament is dissolved. I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for the open and transparent way you've always approached us, not just in agreeing to give evidence whenever we've asked you, but also in your written communications, which frankly are ones that are models, because you actually answer questions that you're asked, which is very unusual, we found, when the committee writes. And we'd like to thank you and your officers for the work that they do in the Metropolitan Police area, in particular the fact that stop and searches are down by 2/3, and as you've just said to colleagues, that the number of police officers remain at 32,000, even though you've had cuts of over 600 million. But in particular, I can well recall your appointment and your first appearance before this committee when the Met was in turmoil, and you have arrived and you have been a very safe pair of hands, providing good leadership to your officers, and we'd like to commend you for the way in which you've done that and wish you the best of luck for the future.
Well, Chairman, that's the first time I've come to this committee and felt warm as I've left. May I say two things? First of all, thanks for the respect which has been shown to me by this committee and my officers, because that is not always the case when people ask us questions. And secondly, I wish you well in the weeks that follow, and we may resume our acquaintance.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Order, order. Thank you, Commissioner. Could we have the Turkish ambassador with our due apologies for keeping you waiting for so long, Your Excellency. Which relate, of course, primarily to the case that you've heard. But I want to start by thanking you sincerely for coming here. I know you're extremely busy. And to reiterate a point that I have made and others have made to our previous witnesses, that relations between our two countries are solid, that we appreciate greatly the assistance that Turkey gives to the United Kingdom in the fight against international crime. In particular, your predecessor, enabled us to go and visit Turkey on a number of occasions, looking at the fight against illegal migration, as well as the problems that you have with international crime. Clearly, Turkey is a hub for people who leave the United Kingdom and therefore go to fight in Syria. Is there anything more that this government can provide you with, and the United Kingdom can provide Turkey with, in order to try and track these young British citizens who travel from the United Kingdom through Turkey and end up in Syria?
Yeah, thank you very much, Right Honourable Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of this committee. It's with pleasure that I accept to meet with you today in the context of, as you have already mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the rooted relations between Turkey and the UK as allies, despite, I should say, it is not in our diplomatic traditions to attend committee meetings. I also consider this an opportune occasion to have your views regarding certain matters that are of interest to my government.
Would it help if I start with just a couple of opening questions on this? In respect to the case you've heard, and thank you for sitting through all the evidence, we really appreciate this. In respect of these young girls who travel from London to Istanbul, Mr. Lawton, I know, will want to pursue the issue of the airlines with you, because we invited Turkish Airlines to come, but they said that you were going to represent the interests of Turkey here. Once a British citizen gets to Istanbul, for example, in the circumstances of these three young girls, is it the case that you are able to track them once you are informed that they are there? Is it an easy process to track these people? Is there a well-worn path from Istanbul to Syria?
Yeah. First, I think the primary obligation is on the shoulders of the source country, because they should be stopped at the source country before exiting the country. You know, and you mentioned today and also yesterday at the Parliament, the enormous pressure on shoulders of Turkey. Our neighborhood is not a rose garden. So if we have timely information and detailed information well before the arrival, of course, under certain circumstances, there might be some incidents that you cannot stop. Then if we have timely information, photos, travel documents, whatever, detailed other information, then it's of course easy for us to track.
Sure.
Yeah.
In this particular case, the Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey has said that the information and the requests for assistance only came through from London on Friday, even though the girls had left the United Kingdom on Tuesday. Yeah. Can you help this committee with any information about that? Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to have a role to play between two politicians of two sides.
Right.
But what I will say, I will not comment on previous statements on both sides, but I can give you some exact sharp details.
Please. And could you speak up just a little bit louder? The
Okay.
acoustics are very bad in this room.
With pleasure. Now, these three girls, victims, who flew to Turkey, left the UK on 17th February at 12:40 p.m. local time, and arrived at Istanbul Atatürk Airport at the same day at 18:40 p.m. local time in Istanbul. The other day, the liaison officer of our embassy received a telephone call that there will be a missing person case, but no details were given to him, including a name, okay, even a name not mentioned.
So none of the girls' names were mentioned to
But an email sent to the security liaison officer of our embassy in London on 18th February 2015 at 19:55 p.m. after office hours, only to be seen by him a day after. So this is the third day. So
Thursday.
if you say that we inform
yes,
the following day.
So the email was only picked up on Thursday morning.
Yeah, and what we have done, I will give some further details.
Please.
I will not comment further on that because these are sharp details I have.
We just want the facts.
The diffusion and notification messages on these 3 girls were published in Interpol database on 22nd of February 2015.
That was the Sunday.
Yeah. British Embassy in Ankara sent the first note verbal, we say with the French word, verbal note, but it is in written form, regarding these girls in the evening of 23rd of February to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So these are, to my best knowledge,
on the
as far as
23rd,
I have been informed.
on the Monday afterwards.
Yeah. But I mentioned the chronology.
Thank you.
Dates, timing, exact timing. So that's why I said 12:40.
Yes.
19:55. So that's why I say this.
Right.
But when mentioning this, let me also say that we have very good relations with British authorities, and it is getting better and better.
Of course.
Sharing of information is increasing, but still there is a lot to be done.
Of course.
For example, you asked me your first question, now I'm coming back to that. What you said, what else can we do? I have heard here that today that letters were sent in December, as early as December, to the school of these families, these girls. So if we had known those names, because we have no entry lists, and we have information. Now, in our no entry lists, we have more than 12,500 persons. So if we have timely information, if we have, as we have such lists, then it is quite possible. And
so
just to give you,
yes,
what happens in that case? That there had been from the UK, some came to Istanbul, arrived in Istanbul, and they were denied entry based on these lists.
Sure.
So it's functional. And up to now, more than 1,150 persons were deported.
Very interesting. Excellency, you heard the evidence of the police who said that they could not send anyone over to Istanbul to try and track down these girls, because obviously it's a foreign country and you don't want British police officers running around all over your country. Does the Turkish government know the route that is being taken by those who come from Britain who end up fighting in Syria? Is it a well-worn route? Because you were able to find the CCTV footage of the girls in the bus station for the British authorities. So do you know the route that is being taken? Did you know that it's that particular bus station that is used? And is that information communicated to the British?
Now, this is important because we didn't have those names, so we didn't know them. Turkey receives annually 35 million tourists.
Sure.
So it is not easy. And, but if we share information, if we know, then we can do something. That's right, we have CCTV footage in Turkey, and we try to understand. And as you probably emphasize this, there should be a facilitation network, because these girls probably they know who to call, where to go. But we have this CCTV footage in Turkey, but if it is possible, if we have CCTV footage here at Gatwick Airport,
yes,
and why not to work on them together?
Of course.
Both sides.
But you
it will be very helpful.
In respect to the facts of this case, you are telling this committee that you were not told, the Turkish authorities were not given names of any individuals. It was not put on until the 23rd, when it arrived in Ankara, but that you were given, it was put on the Interpol database on the 22nd, which is a Sunday, and the first time you all had the details was in an email that came on the evening of Wednesday, and it only was picked, because by email, after office hours, and it was only picked up by your officials the next morning. It just doesn't seem to me like it was transmitted to you in an urgent way.
Well, I gave the exact
Yes, I
details,
understand that, and I'm grateful.
That's right. So the following day, after working hours, but to be seen by,
of course,
the liaison officer.
No, we understand why
So-
you therefore got the footage on
yeah,
Friday.
Yeah. So imagine, and in Istanbul, you can fly to any other destination.
Of course, yes.
You can use train. You can go by bus. There are many border cities, border towns, not only Gaziantep, but many other cities.
Yes.
And there are many bus operators over there.
Sure.
For all these towns. So
Of course.
imagine the huge.
But you
task
managed to
add
find
on the-
you managed to find the CCTV footage,
That's
which we're
right.
very grateful
Yeah.
for. Mr. Lawton has some specific questions about the airlines.
Okay.
So the route they took was from Istanbul to Gaziantep by bus.
I don't know. To my best, I don't know how and via which route they went. But I saw the footage. I saw them on TV at the bus terminal. But I don't know which route they have.
But presumably we do know that, because-
Gaziantep or another border town. I'm not sure.
But presumably we do know that, don't we? Because if you've identified them at a bus station,
Of
somebody
course,
presumably has asked
yeah,
the
it
person
is-
where they
yeah.
sold them the ticket to.
Yeah, of course. It is known now, most probably, if it was.
And if it was Gaziantep, let's say it was Gaziantep, it's a very long journey, isn't it, on the bus?
Yeah, still, but I gave you the details.
But how long?
Do you think it is possible still to find them and prevent them?
No, what the point we're trying to make, which the police weren't able to help us with, is if there had been an urgency in communicating these missing girls, that the most obvious route, which could be traced if we knew they'd gone to Istanbul, is to get a bus down to Gaziantep as the major border town there. And what we're just trying to ascertain is whether the police, if they had translated this information in a timely manner, the obvious starting point for Turkish police would be to check with the bus.
Yeah,
which
I would like-
actually turned out to be where
yeah.
they'd gone, I think.
I'd like to bring to your kind attention that we have, just to give you an idea, the borderline with Syria and Iraq is more than 1,300 kilometers. It is more than from London to Inverness. So imagine such a geography. And there are many cities. Let me say, Kilis.
So, I know, I've been there.
Kilis.
I
So you know.
understand. No, I understand.
And 52% of the population is now Syrian. Mardin, Urfa, and many other settlements with different bus operators. So
Excellency,
it is not so simple.
No, I understand
so
that. And, limited time, we don't really need to have time for a geography lesson of what happens there. We know that there's a very large population of Syrian refugees, which Turkey has generously paid host to. The point I'm just trying to make is, it's not as though it would appear that they went surrogately by bus, by car, by back routes. They went in the most obvious and transparent route. But can I just ask you, though, in terms of the airlines, given that this is a topical issue, given it is an alarming issue about people travelling from the UK and other European countries, have your airlines been briefed as to ask questions if they are confronted with young kids like this, where clearly, why would they be travelling unaccompanied to Turkey in school term time?
Yeah.
And some questions should have been answered. Will Turkish Airlines, because they couldn't be here today, will they be answering those sorts of questions in London?
Yeah. Well, it is only Director General of Turkish Airlines who is not here today. But I know the answer. I know the details, and I will give you the exact information. Well, Turkish Airlines, it is the fourth time that they have been chosen as the best European, best airlines in Europe.
They're very good, yes.
Very good.
Very good.
So they know how to deal with, in all senses, including cooperation with local authorities. But in this case, when we look at local laws and regulations on unaccompanied minors aged between 13 to 17, when we look at that, we have recommended practice 1753, and it provides that only those children yet to celebrate their 12th birthday are automatically classed as unaccompanied minors. Passengers 12 or over, but under 16, can be treated as unaccompanied minors upon request, but only if this request is made in advance of the date of scheduled travel. And only then would the procedures for unaccompanied minors be applicable. I think this is quite clear. And these procedures include...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Can we talk about border controls more broadly for Turkey? Because clearly there is also a problem with refugees and asylum seekers from Middle Eastern countries accessing Europe through Turkey. And a route from Turkey into Greece is where many of these people are coming. And we've seen many of them ended up in Calais.
Yeah.
So have you significantly beefed up your border controls, both incoming as well as exiting people?
Yes. First of all, I have to say that, once again, we have more than 1,600,000 refugees. And it is not easy. It is not so simple. It is not just a matter of sheltering them.
Sure.
It is healthcare, it is education, it's everything. And of course, free of charge. So that's why we have spent more than $5 billion. So
thank you.
When we hear immigration issues here, so today, thank you very much for your references
I can assure you,
to Turkey's
Excellency,
sacrifice.
this
Mr.
committee
Chairman.
has gone to Parliament and on the floor of the House to the Prime Minister argued more support for Turkey and your border. Yeah. We have a final question from Mr. Winnick.
Ambassador, I would like to also associate myself with the apologies. It's most unfortunate that you were kept waiting, and one hopes I won't be repeated on other occasions. Recognising the refugee problem which you undoubtedly face, that's been quite publicised in this country. Nevertheless, do you feel more could be done at airports where there are clearly young people, I mean, we're talking about 3 females, 15 years of age, for them to be seen and interviewed while they've arrived in Turkey, unaccompanied, no parents with them?
Yeah. Well, first, I should say that since the eruption of the Syrian crisis, in addition to the standard counter-terrorism practices, intelligence activities have been further intensified. Qualified personnel, additional equipment are deployed to different cities at the border. Border security is fortified with additional personnel and equipment, weaponry, armored vehicles, night vision devices, thermal cameras. Certain parts of the border have been lightened, walls have been built at various points, trenches have been dug along, and numerous sections have been fenced. And Turkish security units are at alert on 24/7 basis, and operations do continue against smugglers, who are also known to assist illegal crossings of foreign fighters. We must not lose sight of the fact that full control of land borders is always a complicated issue anywhere in the world. This is even more so, particularly when there is a vacuum of authority and presence of more than one terrorist group on the other side of the border.
That's very helpful. Very final question for me. Can Turkey do anything to help bring these girls back? Very quick answer. Can Turkey do anything to help to bring these girls back?
Yes, in close cooperation, we can work together, our authorities can work together on these issues. And if we have a better understanding of facilitation networks, then we can find, we can trace, we can find a way, hopefully.
Thank you. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry we've overrun so much on this, but as you know, a lot of questions had to be asked, but I'm extremely grateful. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Order, order. That concludes this session. Thank you.
Order. Can I welcome members of the public to this sitting of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and what I strongly suspect will be the last opportunity to question the Foreign Secretary and his team on world events. Foreign Secretary, Mr. Oakden, Sir Simon, welcome. Good to see you here today.
Thank you.
Foreign Secretary, this committee published a report a couple of weeks ago on the finance, performance and administration of the Foreign Office, at which we rather felt that the Foreign Office was at a bit of a crossroads. In our judgment, it had done a good job over the last 5 years, but it is spread rather thinly. And the choice now is whether or not we maintain that spread but deepen it, which requires extra resources, or we narrow the bandwidth of the Foreign Office and tailor our aspirations accordingly. Which direction do you think we ought to be going?
Well, it is certainly the key decision, breadth versus depth, and this is not a new discussion in the Foreign Office. I asked the lead non-executive to conduct a review of the network shift policy that was introduced, changing the allocation of resources and opening some new posts, and I, in the course of doing that piece of work, I discovered that actually this debate has been going on in the Foreign Office, not just during the course of this Parliament, but for many years, about the tension between breadth, coverage, and depth, the intensity of resources. Clearly, and by the way, that review suggested that the network shift decisions that had been taken had been broadly the right decisions and had broadly satisfactory outcomes. I think when we know what our resource envelope for the next Parliament is after the next spending review, I think this is a discussion that the Foreign Office needs to hold once again between breadth of coverage, footprint, and depth of coverage, and also around the balance between the resource that's devoted to the core bilateral and multilateral relationships and what I call the thematic resource that is focused around the, if you like, diplomatic themes within the Foreign Office in London. When I came to this debate, started